Welcome to Background Historian, the place where history is told softly, slowly, and in the background, so you can drift into sleep while journeying through the past. Each night we'll explore another story of civilizations, empires, and everyday lives, spoken in a soothing tone, meant to calm your mind and carry you gently toward rest. Close your eyes for a moment, and imagine yourself drifting across the wine-dark sea of the Aegean. The water is calm, a sheet of liquid sapphire stretching to the horizon, and above it, the Cretan sun glows with a warm, golden fire. The salt air fills your lungs, crisp and fresh, mingled with the scent of thyme and rosemary carried from the hillsides of distant islands. The sound of waves licking against a wooden hull keeps steady time, like a heartbeat, as you sail toward one of the most fascinating mysteries of the ancient world, the story of the Minoans, and the legendary city of Knossos. This journey will not be hurried. Like all good stories told under starlight or by firelight, it must unfold slowly, layer upon layer, like a labyrinth revealing its paths. Tonight we begin not with the fall of empires or the clash of kings, but with the simple act of arrival. For before one can understand the Minoans, one must first arrive at Crete, the island that cradled them, the land that shaped them, and the sea that carried their stories far and wide. The island of Crete. Crete lies like a sleeping giant in the southern Aegean, the largest of all the Greek islands. To the north stretch the familiar lands of mainland Greece, while to the south the Libyan Sea stretches endlessly toward Africa. Eastward lies Cyprus and the Levant, westward, the Peloponnese. In this crossroads of worlds, Crete rises from the sea with rugged mountains and fertile plains, a place at once isolated and connected. For millennia, Crete has been a bridge. It is a land where olive trees twist their silver-green leaves toward the sky, where vineyards cling to terraced slopes, and where shepherds lead flocks of goats up stony trails. Its mountains are not gentle hills but dramatic ranges, the White Mountains of the west, the towering Ida in the center, and Dicte to the east. Valleys run deep between them, and rivers cut narrow gorges where sunlight falls only at midday. From high ridges one can see both the northern and southern shores, a reminder that this island, though vast, was never far from the sea. And the sea was everything. To live on Crete was to live with the sea in your blood. It was highway, provider, and protector all at once. The Minoans were born of it, defined by it, and carried by it into legend. A land before time. Long before the name Minoan was spoken, Crete was already alive with people. Farmers sowed barley and wheat in fertile valleys, herders kept goats and sheep on the hills, and fishermen cast nets into the waters. Archaeologists tell us that Neolithic villages dotted the island as early as 7000 BCE, when people first brought grains, animals, and pottery from Anatolia and the Near East. They built homes of mud, brick, and stone, and they tilled the earth as they looked out upon a horizon unbroken by sails. It is humbling to imagine those earliest generations, standing where you now stand, gazing upon the same mountains, the same sky, and the same endless sea. They did not yet call themselves Minoans, nor did they build palaces or paint frescoes of leaping dolphins. But they laid the foundations for what would come, a culture that would bloom into something dazzling, mysterious, and unlike anything the ancient world had seen. The birth of the Minoans. By the 3rd millennium BCE, Crete was no longer just a scattering of villages. The island was awakening. Trade began to hum across the Aegean as copper and tin flowed from distant lands to create bronze, the metal that defined an age. Small towns grew into larger settlements, and pottery became more refined, painted with swirling spirals and graceful shapes inspired by the sea. From the land and water, a new culture was rising, one so distinctive that centuries later, it would be given a name drawn from myth, the Minoans, after the legendary king Minos. We do not know what these people called themselves. Their own language, written in a script known as Linear A, remains undeciphered to this day. But we know them through their art, their architecture, and their legacy. We know them through the ruins of Knossos, the great palace city whose name still whispers with mystery. And we know them through the myths told by the Greeks who came after, stories of labyrinths and monsters, of queens and craftsmen, of gods born in caves and bulls that breathed fire in the mind's imagination. The Sea People. The Minoans have often been called the first great seafaring civilization of Europe. Their ships carried goods and ideas from Egypt to Anatolia, from Cyprus to the Greek mainland. In frescoes and seals, we see long ships painted with graceful curves, rows of oars cutting the water, sails catching the wind. They exported olive oil, wine, and finely painted pottery, and in return they received gold, ivory, and exotic treasures. It was a world connected by trade, and Crete sat in the very heart of it. But theirs was not a world of conquest. Unlike the later Mycenaeans or the warlike city-states of classical Greece, the Minoans left little evidence of fortifications or great armies. Their strength lay not in spears and shields, but in ships and commerce, in culture and influence. They wove connections across the sea, a web of trade and diplomacy that made Crete wealthy and vibrant. Knossos, the heart of the labyrinth. And at the center of it all, like a heartbeat, was Knossos. Knossos is not just a ruin. It is a legend. Situated a few kilometers south of the modern Cretan capital, Heraklion, Knossos was the largest and most elaborate of the Minoan palace complexes. Even in its ruined state, with its red-painted columns and reconstructed walls, it evokes a sense of awe. Imagine it as it once was, multi-storied halls painted with brilliant frescoes, storerooms filled with jars of oil and grain, courtyards echoing with the sound of music and ritual. Corridors wound and turned, leading to chambers whose purposes are still debated, throne rooms, sanctuaries, workshops, and residences. To walk through Knossos is to walk through a labyrinth, and perhaps that is why the Greeks wove the myth of the Minotaur here. They told of King Minos, who demanded tribute from Athens, and of the monstrous half-bull that lurked in the winding halls beneath the palace. Whether myth or metaphor, the labyrinth became a symbol inseparable from Knossos, a reminder of how the ancient world often blended fact with imagination. A mystery of time. But for all its grandeur, Knossos raises more questions than it answers. Who ruled here? Was there truly a king, or was power shared among priestesses and councils? Was the palace the seat of government, or was it more a temple, a sacred space for ritual? Why do its walls depict so few scenes of battle, yet so many of animals, dancers, and nature? What happened to this civilization, so advanced and peaceful, that it seemed to vanish into the sea of history? These are the mysteries that draw us into the story of the Minoans. To explore them is not just to learn history, but to step into the imagination, to wander halls where myth and memory intertwine. The story ahead. And so, tonight, as you rest and let the cadence of words carry you, we begin this 20-part journey. Over the nights to come, we will walk through the palaces of Knossos, Phaistos, and Malea. We will watch the bull leapers vault with grace over charging animals. We will sail with Minoan merchants to foreign shores, and we will sit beside priestesses as they light sacred fires. We will listen to the myths of the Minotaur and Ariadne's thread, and we will feel the earth tremble with the eruption of Thera. We will witness the decline of a civilization, the coming of the Mycenaeans, and the rediscovery of Knossos by archaeologists in the modern age. This story will unfold slowly, like the turning of a great clay jar, like the weaving of a tapestry. Each part will bring us closer to the heart of the Minoans, and to the secrets of the lost city of Knossos. By the end, perhaps, you will feel that you too have walked through its halls, touched its painted walls, and heard the whispers of its people. A gentle closing for tonight. But for now, let us rest in this first arrival. Picture yourself standing on the shores of Crete, the sea behind you and the mountains before you. The air is warm, the sky is soft with evening light, and somewhere in the distance, a flute begins to play. You are at the threshold of a story thousands of years old, a story both real and legendary, both history and dream. The Minoans are waiting. Knossos is waiting. And tomorrow, as we continue, we will step deeper into their world. The sea is calm again tonight. Picture yourself once more along the shores of Crete. The sand is pale, almost golden, and the waves rise and fall with a rhythm that feels timeless. Imagine walking inland, leaving behind the salt of the Aegean and climbing gently into the island's valleys. Here the land becomes fertile, green with olive trees, vines, and fields of barley. The air smells of soil and herbs, sage, thyme, and oregano, and if you listen closely, you might hear the faint sound of goat bells clinking in the distance. We are traveling backward now, across thousands of years. The palaces have not yet risen, and Knossos is not yet a name whispered in myth. The frescoes are still unpainted, the bull leaping unimagined. Instead, the island is alive with small villages, humble stone houses, and a people who are only beginning to shape the culture that will one day astonish the world. This is the dawn of the Minoans. Neolithic Crete, the first settlers. To understand the rise of the Minoans, we must first look to the Neolithic Age, around 7000 BCE. Imagine small groups of settlers arriving on Crete's shores, likely from Anatolia or the Near East. They carried with them the seeds of grain, the knowledge of farming, and the animals that would sustain them: goats, sheep, pigs, and cattle. They built homes of stone and mud brick, clustered into villages where smoke rose gently from hearths. Life was simple but steady. They grew wheat and barley, collected wild herbs, and hunted when needed. Pottery was one of their first great innovations. Imagine rough clay pots shaped by hand, baked in open fires. Over time, these vessels became more refined, decorated with spirals and geometric designs that seemed to mimic the movement of waves or the curling of plants. Even in their earliest art, one senses a fascination with rhythm, pattern, and the natural world. The Neolithic people of Crete may not have thought of themselves as the founders of something new, but they planted the seeds. In their villages, in their pottery, and in their relationship to the land, we can glimpse the earliest whispers of what would become the Minoan identity. A world shaped by geography. Why Crete? Why here, in this rugged island in the middle of the sea? The answer lies in geography. Crete is both isolated and connected. Its mountains kept it distinct, creating a culture that developed in relative safety from constant invasion. Yet its location placed it at the very crossroads of the Mediterranean, between Europe, Asia, and Africa. From Crete, a ship could sail north to mainland Greece, east to the Levant, south to Egypt, or west toward Italy. It was a perfect meeting place of worlds. This geography shaped the early Cretans in profound ways. They were farmers, yes, but they were also sailors. They looked outward as well as inward, and from early on, the sea became their lifeline. Fish filled their nets, and obsidian, metals, and other goods arrived from abroad. Even before the palaces, Crete was not an isolated backwater, it was part of a wider network of exchange. The Bronze Age transformation. By around 3000 BCE, the world was entering the Bronze Age. The discovery and mastery of bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, transformed societies. Bronze was harder and more durable than stone, and it allowed for stronger tools, sharper weapons, and new possibilities in farming, warfare, and artistry. Crete was quick to embrace this transformation. Evidence of bronze tools appears in archaeological sites, along with more sophisticated pottery styles and larger settlements. Trade expanded, as copper came from Cyprus and tin from distant lands. With bronze, the Cretans could work with more finely, carve stone with precision, and create ornaments that gleamed with power and beauty. This was the true beginning of the Minoan culture, a fusion of agriculture, craftsmanship, and seafaring that allowed the island to flourish. The Bronze Age did not simply bring new tools, it brought a new way of life, one that elevated Crete from a cluster of villages into a civilization. The first hints of palaces. Before Knossos rose in grandeur, there were smaller centers of power. Archaeologists speak of the prepalatial period, when Crete's first complex societies began to take shape. Villages grew into towns, and some sites show evidence of larger communal buildings, structures that may have been precursors to the great palaces. At this stage, power likely rested in local chieftains or councils. Religion was central, though not yet fully revealed in its later grandeur. Figurines from this time show women with raised arms, perhaps priestesses or goddesses, while others depict animals or symbolic objects. Even in this early age, ritual and spirituality were interwoven with daily life. It is easy to imagine gatherings at these early centers, villagers bringing offerings of grain, oil, or wine, musicians playing flutes and lyres, dancers moving in rhythm beneath the open sky. These moments of community, of shared ritual, were the first sparks of a culture that would later blossom into full brilliance. Trade and exchange, seeds of wealth. The Minoans did not rise in isolation. Their island was positioned perfectly for trade, and by the early Bronze Age, Crete had become a hub of exchange. Pottery from Crete has been found on other islands and mainland Greece, while foreign artifacts have been uncovered on Crete itself. Imagine a Cretan ship, small by later standards but sturdy, sailing across the sea. On board are jars of olive oil, amphorae of wine, and painted pottery, each carefully packed for transport. The sailors might land in the Cyclades, exchange goods for obsidian or metal, and then sail on to Egypt, where the grandeur of the Nile civilization left a powerful impression. From these journeys, the Cretans not only gained wealth but also knowledge, new ideas, new styles, new ways of seeing the world. Trade enriched the island materially, but it also enriched it culturally. Every imported object, every foreign motif, became part of the tapestry of Minoan life. In this way, Crete became a melting pot, a place where cultures mingled and something unique emerged. Spiritual beginnings. The dawn of the Minoans was also the dawn of their spiritual identity. Religion, though not fully understood, was central to their world. Shrines and figurines suggest a reverence for goddesses, perhaps linked to fertility, nature, and the cycles of life. The bull, which would later become a central symbol, already appeared in early art and ritual. Archaeologists have uncovered sacred caves and peak sanctuaries, where offerings were left in small clay vessels. To climb a mountain and leave an offering at its peak was to bridge the gap between earth and sky, human and divine. To enter a cave and light a fire was to descend into the womb of the earth, the hidden place where life and mystery dwelled. These practices reveal a people deeply attuned to the land around them, finding the sacred in both heights and depths. The seeds of Knossos. By the end of the 3rd millennium BCE, Crete was ready for something greater. The villages had grown, trade had expanded, and spiritual life had deepened. Out of this fertile ground would soon rise the first true palaces, grand, multi-storied complexes that would serve as centers of administration, religion, and culture. Knossos was among them, though not yet the sprawling labyrinth it would become. In its earliest form, it was likely a large communal structure, perhaps already filled with storerooms, workshops, and gathering spaces. From this beginning, the city would grow and evolve, becoming the jewel of Minoan civilization. Looking ahead. The dawn of the Minoans was not a single moment but a gradual unfolding. Over centuries, they transformed from simple farmers into skilled sailors, traders, and artisans. They developed a distinct identity, rooted in the land and sea, enriched by contact with other cultures, and expressed through art and ritual. As the sun sets over Crete in your imagination, picture those early villages. Smoke rises from hearths, goats wander through fields, and children play near the water's edge. The people here do not yet know that they will one day inspire myths of kings and monsters, of labyrinths and goddesses. They are simply living, planting, sailing, and building. And yet, in their everyday actions, they are laying the foundation for a civilization that will echo through time. Tomorrow, we will step deeper into their story. We will walk through the rising grandeur of Knossos itself, the palace that became legend. Its halls, its frescoes, and its mysteries await us. But for now, rest in the quiet dawn of the Minoans, where everything is beginning, and the future lies ahead like the wide, open sea. Imagine standing before the grand palace of Knossos as it once was, not as the ruins of today, but in its full splendor nearly 4,000 years ago. The air is warm with the scent of blooming flowers, and the sound of cicadas hums from the olive groves. Before you stretches a sprawling complex unlike anything seen before in Europe, a palace of red columns, painted walls, vast courtyards, and endless corridors that twist and turn like the paths of a maze. This is Knossos, the heart of Minoan civilization, the place where myth and history intertwine. Tonight, let us wander these halls together. Slowly, step by step, we will trace the grandeur of Knossos, not in haste, but with the calm of a dream. For Knossos is not just a ruin. It is a labyrinth of imagination, a place where every wall whispers stories of the past. The discovery of Knossos. Before we step back into the ancient world, let us pause briefly in the modern age. For centuries, Knossos lay hidden beneath the earth, known only in legend. Local villagers in Crete spoke of ancient ruins, of stones buried beneath hills, but it was not until 1900 that British archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans uncovered the Great Palace. His excavations revealed a vast complex, far larger than anyone had imagined, filled with frescoes, storerooms, staircases, and chambers. Evans was struck by its complexity, its seemingly endless corridors and rooms. To him, it was the labyrinth of legend, the palace of King Minos, the home of the Minotaur. He restored portions of the site with concrete and paint, controversial though those restorations are today, and he gave the civilization its name, the Minoans. Without Evans, Knossos might still lie buried in the soil, but thanks to him, the world was reintroduced to this ancient marvel. The palace as a city. Knossos was not merely a palace. It was a city within a city, a sprawling complex that covered nearly 20,000 square meters. Imagine walking its streets, staircases leading to upper floors, corridors connecting storerooms, workshops bustling with artisans, courtyards alive with ceremonies. At its height, the palace may have contained over 1,000 rooms. It was not a fortress. Unlike the later Mycenaean citadels on the mainland, Knossos had no thick defensive walls. Instead, it was open, expansive, and integrated into the surrounding city. This tells us something profound about the Minoans. They felt secure, not threatened, confident in their control of the seas and their place in the world. Power here was not expressed in fortifications, but in grandeur, artistry, and ritual. The central court. At the very heart of Knossos lay the central court. Imagine a wide open space, paved with stone, surrounded by buildings on all sides. Here, under the open sky, people gathered for ceremonies, processions, and perhaps even the famous bull-leaping ritual. One can almost hear the sound of drums and flutes, the shouts of onlookers, the rush of hooves across stone. The court was not just a gathering place, it was a stage upon which Minoan life unfolded. Religious rituals, political ceremonies, and community festivals would have centered here. From the court, corridors branched outward like arteries, leading into the labyrinthine heart of the palace. The throne room. Step with me now into the throne room, one of the most iconic chambers of Knossos. The room is small, intimate, with benches lining the walls and a stone seat set against the far side. Frescoes of griffins, mythical creatures with the body of a lion and the head of an eagle, flank the throne, watching with fierce eyes. A large stone basin sits at the center, perhaps used for ritual purification. Was this truly the seat of a king? Or was it the chair of a high priestess, guardian of ritual and ceremony? Scholars debate this, for the Minoans left no clear inscriptions to guide us. Yet the room itself speaks of authority, of sacredness, of decisions made and rituals performed. To sit here was not merely to rule, but to embody the connection between people and the divine. Frescoes on the walls. As you walk the halls of Knossos, your eyes are constantly drawn to the walls. Frescoes, paintings on wet plaster, covered them in vivid color. Unlike the art of many ancient cultures, which glorified war and conquest, Minoan frescoes celebrated life, nature, and joy. Dolphins leap across waves in brilliant blues, women dance in flowing dresses, acrobats vault over bowls with grace and daring. Flowers bloom, birds soar, and spirals echo the endless movement of the sea. The frescoes are not mere decoration. They are windows into the Minoan soul. They tell us of a people who found beauty in harmony with nature, who valued ritual and performance, and who wove art into every corner of their lives. To walk through Knossos was to be surrounded by color, motion, and life. Storerooms and wealth. Beneath the beauty, there was also practicality. Knossos was an administrative center, and its storerooms reveal the wealth of the Minoans. Imagine vast rooms lined with enormous clay jars, some taller than a man, each capable of holding hundreds of liters of olive oil, wine, or grain. These storerooms were the heart of Minoan economy. Goods flowed into the palace from the surrounding countryside and across the sea, stored here before being redistributed. Knossos was not just a residence, it was a hub of power, wealth, and trade. From here, scribes kept records on clay tablets written in the undeciphered Linear A script. Craftsmen worked in adjoining workshops, creating jewelry, pottery, and textiles. The palace was as much a center of economy as it was of ritual and ceremony. Light and air. One of the marvels of Knossos was its architecture. Unlike the dark, windowless temples of other ancient cultures, Knossos embraced light and air. Open courtyards, light wells, and colonnades allowed sunlight to stream into the rooms. Staircases connected multiple stories, and breezes flowed through open spaces. The red columns, made of wood and wider at the top than at the base, gave the palace a distinctive look that still captivates today. This openness reflects the spirit of the Minoans. Their architecture was not heavy or oppressive, but airy, fluid, and inviting. It mirrored their art, their love of nature, and their connection to the world around them. The labyrinthine design. Why did Knossos come to be seen as a labyrinth? Perhaps because of its sheer complexity. Corridors twist and turn, staircases rise and fall, rooms connect in unexpected ways. To walk through Knossos was to feel both wonder and confusion, to lose oneself in its endless passageways. It is easy to see how later Greeks imagined it as the home of the Minotaur, a creature half-man, half-bull, imprisoned in the maze beneath the palace. In myth, the hero Theseus ventured into this labyrinth, guided by the thread of Ariadne, daughter of King Minos. He slew the Minotaur and escaped, bringing the story of Knossos into legend. Whether the myth was born of the palace or the palace was shaped by the myth, we cannot know. But the connection is eternal. Ritual and ceremony. Knossos was not only a palace of politics and economy, it was a palace of ritual. Altars, shrines, and sacred symbols are found throughout its halls. The double axe, or labyrinth, appears carved into walls and objects, a symbol of power and possibly of the goddess. The bull's horns, another sacred emblem, rise in stone above the palace. Imagine processions winding through the corridors, led by priestesses in flowing dresses, carrying offerings of flowers, oil, or animals. Music echoes through the halls, drums, flutes, and lyres, while dancers move with rhythmic grace. In the central court, perhaps, the dramatic ritual of bull leaping unfolds, young acrobats seizing the horns of a charging bull and vaulting over its back in a feat of daring and devotion. To the Minoans, ritual was not separate from life, it was life. A palace alive with people. It is important to remember that Knossos was not an empty monument. It was alive with people. Scribes scratched records into clay tablets, servants carried jars of oil, artisans hammered bronze and wove cloth, children played in courtyards, and priests or priestesses performed rituals in sacred chambers. The palace was a community, a hive of activity, buzzing with the daily rhythm of life. Close your eyes and picture it, the smell of fresh bread from kitchens, the sound of footsteps echoing on stone, the flicker of torchlight in corridors at night. Knossos was not just a building, it was a living organism, pulsing with the heartbeat of a civilization. The wonder of Knossos. To stand in Knossos today is to stand among ruins. Columns have been reconstructed, frescoes restored, but much is broken, lost to time. Yet even in ruin, the wonder remains. One can still feel the grandeur, the mystery, the sense of walking through a place where myth and reality meet. The labyrinth lives on, not in stone, but in the imagination. Looking ahead. Knossos is the jewel of the Minoans, but it is only one part of their story. In the nights to come, we will look more closely at their art, their rituals, their myths, and their daily lives. We will explore how they lived, what they believed, and how they created one of the most vibrant civilizations of the Bronze Age. But for tonight, let us rest in the palace itself, wandering its halls in our imagination, feeling the cool stone beneath our feet and the warmth of torchlight on painted walls. Knossos is both labyrinth and legend, both ruin and revelation. It is the heart of the Minoans, and its heartbeat still echoes across time. The palace of Knossos is quiet tonight. Imagine yourself standing in one of its long, painted corridors. The air is cool, scented faintly of lime plaster and dust, and torchlight flickers along the walls. But the real magic lies not in the stones themselves, but in what decorates them. All around you, the walls come alive with color. Dolphins leap through swirling blue waters, lilies bloom in red and white, and human figures dance in flowing movement. These are the frescoes of the Minoans, images that have outlasted centuries, carrying to us a vision of life, beauty, and meaning in a world long vanished. Tonight, we explore this art, not simply as decoration, but as a window into the Minoan soul. For the frescoes of Knossos and other palaces are among the most vivid remnants of their civilization, and they tell us stories no written record can reveal. A world painted in color. Imagine the process. Workers spread wet plaster along the stone walls of a room. Before it could dry, painters mixed pigments of brilliant blue, deep red, golden yellow, and soft white. With swift, practiced strokes, they painted figures, patterns, and scenes directly into the plaster. Because the paint fused with the drying wall, the images endured, surviving thousands of years even beneath rubble and soil. This is the technique of fresco painting, and the Minoans mastered it with extraordinary skill. But more than skill, they painted with vision. Their frescoes are not stiff or rigid, but alive with movement. Dolphins arc gracefully above waves. Young men leap over bulls in daring acrobatics. Women with flowing skirts raise their arms in dance or ritual. Even flowers seem to sway in an unseen breeze. To step into a Minoan hall was to step into a world alive with color, rhythm, and joy. The sea as inspiration. No theme appears more often in Minoan art than the sea. This is fitting, for Crete was an island whose life depended on the water around it. Ships carried goods, people, and ideas across the Mediterranean, and the sea's bounty sustained communities with fish and trade. One of the most famous frescoes is the dolphin fresco from Knossos. Picture it. Bright blue dolphins leaping across a field of water, surrounded by smaller fish darting through the waves. The animals are not stiffly drawn, but natural, almost playful, their curves and colors capturing the essence of life in the sea. To the Minoans, the sea was not only a resource, it was a symbol of harmony, beauty, and vitality. Other frescoes depict octopuses spreading their tentacles across pottery, fish swimming in schools, and ships sailing across the waves. Everywhere, the sea appears as a living presence, woven into daily life and spiritual meaning. For the Minoans, the sea was not merely outside their world, it was at the heart of it. Bowls and sacred rituals. Alongside the sea, another symbol dominates Minoan art, the bowl. Strong, powerful, and dangerous, the bowl held deep meaning in their culture. Perhaps the most striking images are those of bull leaping. Frescoes show young acrobats grasping the horns of a charging bull, vaulting into the air, and landing gracefully on its back or behind it. The figures are lithe, their movements fluid, as if the act were not one of violence, but of dance. What did this ritual mean? Some believe it was a rite of passage, a demonstration of courage and skill. Others see it as a religious ceremony, symbolizing human mastery of nature or communion with the divine. Whatever its meaning, the images are breathtaking. They capture both the danger of the bull and the grace of the human spirit, united in a moment of daring balance. The bull appears elsewhere too, in statues, seals, and carved symbols. Its horns are echoed in stone, horns of consecration, placed atop buildings, while the double axe, or labyrinth, another sacred symbol, is sometimes linked to the bull as well. Together, these images remind us that Minoan art was not mere decoration, it was imbued with ritual power. Women in Minoan art. One of the most striking aspects of Minoan frescoes is the prominence of women. Unlike many ancient cultures, where men dominate artistic depictions, the Minoans often showed women in positions of prominence, dancing, leading ceremonies, or engaging in rituals. Their clothing is elaborate, with flounced skirts, open bodices, and intricate jewelry. Their postures are confident, their gestures expressive. This suggests that women may have held significant roles in Minoan society, perhaps as priestesses or leaders of ritual. Whether or not they ruled politically, they were central to the spiritual and cultural life of the civilization. The art reflects a society that valued balance, where both men and women played visible, honored roles. Nature in bloom. Flowers and plants appear frequently in Minoan frescoes. Lilies, crocuses, and roses bloom in vivid colors, painted with a naturalism that feels almost modern. Birds perch among branches, monkeys climb through rocky landscapes, and cats stalk their prey. These images show a deep connection to the natural world, not as something to be dominated, but as something to be celebrated. One fresco, the spring fresco from Crete on nearby Thera, though not strictly Minoan, reflects the same aesthetic. Red lilies sway across rocky terrain, swallows dart through the air, and the entire scene hums with the vibrancy of spring. It captures not just the look of nature, but its spirit, the sense of renewal, energy, and harmony. The Minoans lived in a world where nature was sacred. Their art reflects this reverence, reminding us that they saw themselves as part of a living, breathing landscape. The symbolism of color. Color in Minoan art was not random, it carried meaning. Blue, often used for the sea and sky, evoked life, depth, and eternity. Red, used for bowls and human skin, suggested vitality and power. White was purity and light, while yellow and gold reflected the brilliance of the sun. Together, these colors created a visual language, expressing not just beauty, but ideas and beliefs. Even the way figures were painted may have symbolic meaning. In many frescoes, men are depicted with darker, reddish skin, while women are shown with lighter, pale tones. This convention, seen in other ancient cultures as well, may have symbolized different roles or activities, with men often outdoors and women indoors or in ritual spaces. But beyond convention, the colors bring the figures to life, vivid and distinct across the centuries. Abstract patterns and spirals. Not all Minoan art depicts people or animals. Many frescoes and pottery pieces feature abstract patterns, spirals, waves, and geometric shapes. These designs seem to echo natural rhythms, the curl of a wave, the spiral of a shell, the cycle of seasons. The Minoans were fascinated by movement, by flow, by the unseen patterns that shape the world. Their abstract art reflects a worldview where beauty lies in harmony, repetition, and rhythm. A celebration of life. Taken together, Minoan frescoes present a remarkable picture of their culture. Unlike the art of Mesopotamia or Egypt, which often emphasized rulers, battles, or conquest, Minoan art celebrates life itself. It shows joy, dance, ritual, and nature in vivid color. It is a vision of a society more focused on harmony than domination, on beauty rather than war. This does not mean the Minoans were without conflict or hierarchy. They were human, after all. But their art offers a different emphasis, one that speaks to their unique place in history. Through frescoes, we glimpse their values, their rituals, and their sense of wonder at the world around them. Walking through painted halls. Close your eyes and imagine walking through Knossos at its height. The sun streams through an open courtyard, lighting up walls painted with leaping dolphins. You turn a corner and find yourself before a fresco of bull leaping, the figures frozen mid-air, captured forever in a moment of daring. In another room, lilies bloom across the walls, their red petals glowing in the light. Music drifts through the corridors, and the colors seem almost to move in rhythm with the sound. You feel not as though you are in a palace of stone, but in a living canvas, a place where art and life are inseparable. Every wall tells a story, every image carries meaning. Knossos is not only a palace, it is a painting, a work of art on a monumental scale. Looking ahead. Tonight we have wandered through the frescoes and symbols of the Minoans, seeing their love of the sea, the bull, nature, and ritual. Their art is a testament to their values, their creativity, and their vision of a world filled with beauty. But art does not exist in isolation. Behind every fresco and symbol were people, men, women, children, living their daily lives in the rhythm of the palace and the island. Tomorrow, we will step into their world more fully. We will explore the daily life of the people of Knossos, what they ate, what they wore, how they celebrated, and how they worked. For to understand a civilization, one must not only see its art, but also its people. Imagine Knossos at sunrise. The first light pours over the mountains of Crete and spills into the courtyards of the palace. The air is cool, filled with the faint fragrance of olive trees and wild herbs. Slowly, the city stirs awake. From workshops, the clang of bronze begins to sound. From kitchens, the smell of bread rises. Farmers walk in from the fields, carrying baskets of grain and fruit, while merchants prepare goods for trade. Children laugh as they run through the narrow streets. The palace hums with life, not the life of myth and monsters, but of ordinary people whose daily rhythms sustained an extraordinary civilization. Tonight, we step away from frescoes and palaces to meet the people of Knossos. We will walk through their homes, share their meals, learn their crafts, and listen to their festivals. For behind every painted dolphin and every charging bull were men and women, farmers and artisans, priests and sailors. They were the heart of the Minoan world. Homes beyond the palace. While the palace of Knossos stood as a grand center, most people lived in smaller homes scattered across the city and surrounding countryside. These houses were built of stone with flat roofs and multiple levels, sometimes with balconies overlooking the streets. Unlike the cramped dwellings of many ancient cities, Minoan homes were airy, with open courtyards and windows that welcomed light. Inside, walls might be plastered and painted, floors covered with smooth stone. Furniture was simple but functional: wooden stools, low tables, and clay jars for storage. Hearths provided warmth in winter, while rooftops offered cool respite during hot summers. Life in these homes was communal, with families cooking, weaving, and working together in closed spaces that reflected both simplicity and care. Food and farming. What did the people of Knossos eat? Their diet was rich, varied, and closely tied to the land and sea. Olives were central, their oil used not only for cooking, but for lighting lamps, anointing bodies, and religious rituals. Grapes grew in terraced vineyards, pressed into wine that flowed through feasts and ceremonies. Fields of wheat and barley provided bread, the staple of every meal. Figs, pomegranates, and dates added sweetness, while lentils and chickpeas offered hearty sustenance. From the sea came fish, octopus, and shellfish, while goats and sheep provided milk, cheese, and meat. Honey, collected from hives, was the primary sweetener, golden and thick. Meals were often shared communally, eaten with hands or wooden spoons, served in pottery bowls painted with swirling designs. Imagine the taste: warm bread dipped in olive oil, fresh figs bursting with flavor, cheese sharp and tangy, washed down with watered wine. It was a cuisine simple by modern standards, yet nourishing, and tied deeply to the rhythms of the island. Clothing and appearance. The frescoes of Knossos reveal much about how the Minoans dressed. Women wore flounced skirts with many layers, often brightly colored and patterned, paired with tight-fitting bodices that left the breasts exposed, a style that may have had ritual or symbolic meaning. Jewelry adorned their necks, arms, and ears: necklaces of beads, bracelets of bronze, earrings of gold. Their hair was styled elaborately, sometimes curled, sometimes braided, reflecting care and artistry. Men wore kilts or loincloths, often with belts cinched tightly at the waist. In ceremonies, they appeared bare-chested, their skin painted or tanned by the sun. Like the women, they wore jewelry, especially necklaces and armlets, showing that adornment was not limited by gender. Both men and women valued appearance, not in vanity alone, but as a reflection of culture, ritual, and identity. Work and craftsmanship. Daily life in Knossos was filled with work, but it was work that reflected skill and artistry. Farmers tilled fields with wooden plows drawn by oxen. Shepherds led flocks of sheep and goats across the hills, their bells ringing softly in the distance. Fishermen cast nets into the sea, pulling in shimmering catches at dawn. But perhaps the most remarkable were the artisans. Potters shaped clay into elegant vessels, decorated with spirals, dolphins, and octopuses. Bronzesmiths hammered tools and weapons with precision. Weavers spun wool into brightly dyed textiles, their looms clattering in the courtyards of homes. Jewelers crafted delicate pieces of gold and ivory, their hands steady, their eyes sharp. These crafts were not only functional, but beautiful, reflecting the Minoan love of art in every corner of life. Workshops within the palace complex bustled with activity. There were carpenters carving wood, stoneworkers chiseling blocks, and scribes pressing symbols into wet clay tablets. Each person played a role, contributing to the smooth functioning of the palace economy. Their work was both livelihood and legacy. Religion in daily life. Religion was not confined to grand ceremonies. It was woven into daily existence. Small shrines stood in homes, where families left offerings of oil, food, or figurines. Women may have played important roles as priestesses, leading rituals not only in the palace but in villages and homes. Sacred caves and mountain sanctuaries dotted the landscape, places where ordinary people could climb to leave offerings to the gods. Symbols of faith were everywhere. The double axe, the horns of consecration, the images of bulls and snakes, all reminded people of their connection to the divine. Ritual was not a separate part of life, it was life itself. To grind grain, to weave cloth, to light a lamp, each action carried echoes of the sacred. Festivals and celebrations. Though work filled much of their time, the people of Knossos also knew how to celebrate. Festivals marked the cycles of the year, tied to harvests, seasons, and religious rites. Imagine the central court of Knossos filled with music and dance, with men and women processing in colorful garments, carrying offerings of flowers, fruit, and animals. Torches blazed, drums beat, and voices rose in song. One can almost see the bull-leaping ritual, performed not only for religion but for spectacle. Crowds gathered as acrobats faced the charging bull, seizing its horns and vaulting into the air. Gasps and cheers filled the court as each leap defied danger. Whether symbolic of renewal, fertility, or communion with the divine, it was a performance that blended courage with artistry. Music, too, was central. Flutes, lyres, and drums accompanied dancers who moved in circles, stamping feet in rhythm with the beat. The entire community joined in, not as separate classes or groups, but as one people united in joy and ritual. These festivals gave life its rhythm, weaving together work, worship, and celebration into a seamless whole. Children and family life. What of the children of Knossos? They too had their place in daily life. Frescoes show them playing with toys, balls, and hoops, or helping their families in small tasks. They were likely taught skills from a young age, boys learning farming or crafts, girls learning weaving, cooking, or ritual practices. But children were also part of festivals and ceremonies, their laughter ringing through the courtyards, their presence a reminder of renewal and continuity. Families were the foundation of society. Though much of life revolved around the palace, the home remained central. Parents, grandparents, and children lived together, sharing food, work, and stories. In the evenings, after the day's labor, families gathered around hearths, the glow of firelight illuminating faces as tales were told of gods, heroes, and ancestors. These moments bound generations together, carrying culture forward. Health and medicine. Life was not without hardship. Illness, injury, and death were as present then as they are now. The Minoans had knowledge of herbs and natural remedies, drawn from the rich flora of Crete. Plants like thyme, rosemary, and sage were used for healing, while honey served as both food and medicine. Bones from archaeological sites show evidence of injuries healed over time, suggesting care and treatment. Yet life expectancy was short compared to today, and the fragility of life made rituals of birth, fertility, and death all the more significant. Religion, medicine, and daily practice blended into one, providing comfort and continuity in the face of uncertainty. A peaceful people. One of the enduring questions about the Minoans is whether they were truly a peaceful society. Their art shows little of war or conquest. Their cities lacked massive fortifications. Instead, they appear to have focused on trade, ritual, and beauty. This has led some to call them a peaceful civilization, one that thrived on harmony rather than violence. Yet we must be careful. Absence of evidence is not proof of peace. They may have faced conflict, whether from rival groups or outside invaders, but chose not to depict it in their art. What is clear, however, is that daily life in Knossos, as seen through frescoes and artifacts, emphasized joy, beauty, and balance. Whether this reflects reality or aspiration, it is the vision they chose to leave behind. A day in Knossos. Close your eyes and let us walk through a single day in Knossos. Morning begins with farmers entering the palace gates, carrying baskets of olives and jars of wine. In the workshops, artisans light fires and begin their crafts. Children play in courtyards, their voices mingling with the sounds of hammers and looms. By midday, the sun blazes high, and people retreat into shaded rooms, sharing meals of bread, cheese, and figs. In the afternoon, scribes record inventories of grain and oil, while priests prepare offerings in shrines. Women gather to weave bright textiles, their hands moving quickly, their chatter filling the air. Fishermen return from the sea, their nets heavy with the day's catch. As evening falls, torches are lit, music drifts through the corridors, and families gather for rest. Above it all, the palace hums, not with the sound of kings and conquerors, but with the heartbeat of ordinary people. Their lives, simple, joyful, hard-working, were the foundation upon which Minoan culture thrived. Looking ahead. Tonight, we have walked among the people of Knossos, seen their homes, shared their meals, and joined their festivals. Their daily lives were filled with rhythm and beauty, sustained by the land, the sea, and the community. But within these rhythms lay deeper currents, the role of religion, the power of ritual, and the presence of sacred symbols that guided their existence. In the next part of our journey, we will step into the world of Minoan religion more fully. We will meet the priests and priestesses, witness the sacred bowl, and explore the rituals that bound the people of Knossos to their gods. For in their faith, we find the heartbeat of their civilization. The palace of Knossos is quiet beneath the moonlight. Its corridors, painted with dolphins and lilies, are empty now, but centuries ago they echoed with the sound of chanting voices, the beating of drums, and the flicker of torches carried through the halls. In these chambers, rituals were performed, sacrifices made, and mysteries enacted. To the Minoans, life and religion were one. Every harvest, every dance, every festival was suffused with the sacred. And at the center of their spiritual world stood two great presences, the priestesses who guided worship, and the sacred bowl that embodied strength, vitality, and divine power. Tonight, we step into the sacred life of Knossos. Slowly, gently, we will walk through their rituals, meet their spiritual leaders, and try to understand the symbols that bound their world together. A world without kings. Unlike many ancient civilizations, the Minoans left behind no clear images of kings sitting on thrones surrounded by armies. Instead, their art and architecture suggest something different, a society where religion was woven tightly into governance, and where spiritual leaders, particularly priestesses, may have held central roles. In frescoes, women are often depicted larger than men, placed at the center of ceremonies, dressed in elaborate garments, and holding symbols of ritual power. Some scholars believe that Minoan society may have been matrilineal, or at least gave women religious authority. Others suggest a balance, with both men and women sharing sacred duties. Whatever the exact structure, the prominence of female figures in Minoan art is striking. Imagine a priestess standing in a courtyard, dressed in layered skirts of blue and gold, her arms raised in invocation. Around her, musicians play flutes and drums, and the people gather to watch as she leads the community in ritual. She is not only an intermediary between mortals and gods, but a symbol of the sacred itself. The sacred bowl. But alongside the priestesses, one symbol dominates Minoan religion, the bull. Strong, powerful, and dangerous, the bull embodied vitality and fertility. Its image appears everywhere, on seals, in statues, carved into walls, and, most famously, in the frescoes of bull leaping. To the Minoans, the bull was not just an animal, but a sacred presence, a living link between humans and the divine. One can imagine rituals where a bull was led into the central courtyard, its massive body gleaming in the sun, its breath steaming in the cool morning air. Priests and priestesses circled it, chanting and offering libations of wine and oil. And then, in a moment of daring, young acrobats seized its horns, vaulted into the air, and flipped gracefully over its back. This was not merely spectacle, it was communion, a ritual that united human courage with animal power. The bull may also have been linked to the god or goddess of fertility, its strength symbolizing renewal and abundance. Its horns, carved in stone and placed atop buildings as horns of consecration, became one of the most recognizable symbols of Minoan religion. Everywhere one looked in Knossos, the bull was present. The Labyrinth, the double axe. Another sacred symbol often paired with the bull was the Labyrinth, or double axe. This emblem appears carved into stone, painted on walls, and even inscribed on clay tablets. Its meaning is still debated, but it may have represented lightning, sacrifice, or the balance of dual forces. In rituals, the labyrinth may have been used in animal sacrifices, perhaps even in the killing of bulls. But beyond its practical use, it was deeply symbolic, a sign of sacred authority. Some believe the word labyrinth itself comes from Labyrinth, the house of the double axe. If so, then Knossos was not only a palace, but a labyrinth in name as well as design, a place defined by its sacred symbols. Ritual spaces. Where did these ceremonies take place? Everywhere within Knossos hints at sacred function. The central courtyard likely hosted large public rituals, with crowds gathered to watch. Smaller shrines within the palace may have been used for more intimate ceremonies, with altars, benches, and offering tables. Beyond the palace, the Minoans built peak sanctuaries on mountain tops, where offerings were left to the gods under the open sky. Sacred caves, deep within the earth, were also sites of worship, their dark chambers lit by flickering torches, their walls echoing with chants. These dual spaces, the high peaks and the deep caves, reflect a spirituality that sought both the heavens and the underworld, both the light above and the mystery below. Processions and festivals. Ritual was not confined to hidden spaces. It was woven into the life of the community through processions and festivals. Frescoes show lines of men and women carrying vessels, flowers, or gifts, moving through courtyards in solemn ceremony. Music filled the air, the sound of double pipes, drums, and lyres. Dancers moved in circles, their steps echoing the rhythms of the earth itself. These processions may have honored gods of fertility, the renewal of the seasons, or the sacred bull. They brought the community together, uniting farmers, artisans, priests, and rulers in shared celebration. For the Minoans, religion was not distant or abstract. It was lived, embodied, danced, and sung. The snake goddess. Among the most famous artifacts from Knossos are the figurines known as snake goddesses. These small statues depict women holding serpents in their hands, their arms raised, their eyes wide, their garments elaborate. Snakes coil around their arms and rise toward the sky. The meaning of these figures is uncertain. Some see them as representations of goddesses of fertility and renewal, the snake symbolizing rebirth as it sheds its skin. Others see them as images of priestesses in ritual, embodying divine power through their gestures. Whatever their exact meaning, the snake goddesses reflect the centrality of women in Minoan religion, and the blending of natural symbols, snake, fertility, transformation, into their sacred worldview. Sacrifice and offering. No ancient religion was without sacrifice, and the Minoans were no exception. Animals, especially bulls, goats, and sheep, were likely sacrificed in ceremonies, their blood offered to the gods, their meat shared among the community. Libations of wine, oil, and honey were poured onto altars or into the earth, binding human life to the cycles of nature and divinity. But sacrifice was not only about blood. It was about exchange, a gift to the gods in hopes of receiving blessings in return, fertile fields, calm seas, healthy children, and protection from disaster. Through sacrifice, the Minoans affirmed their place in the cosmos, acknowledging both their dependence on the divine and their partnership with it. Music, dance, and ecstasy. If one could travel back in time and witness a Minoan ritual, one would likely be struck by its energy. Music filled the air, not as background, but as an essential part of worship. Flutes and pipes played melodies, drums beat rhythms that echoed in the chest, and lyres strummed harmonies that carried voices skyward. Dancers moved in circles, stamping, swaying, leaping. Their motions may have mimicked the cycles of nature, the rising and setting of the sun, the turning of seasons. Ritual may have led participants into states of ecstasy, a collective experience of connection with the divine. Unlike the solemn rituals of some ancient cultures, Minoan worship seems to have been filled with movement, joy, and life. To worship was not only to kneel or sacrifice, it was to dance, to sing, to leap into communion with gods and nature. Myth and ritual. It is impossible to speak of Minoan religion without touching on the myths that later Greeks told of Crete. The story of King Minos, the Minotaur, and the Labyrinth may be echoes of Minoan rituals, reimagined through the lens of later myth. The bull, central to both myth and ritual, became the monster imprisoned beneath Knossos. The labyrinth, with its endless corridors, became the mythical maze. And Ariadne, the princess who gave Theseus the thread, may reflect the memory of priestesses who guided rituals in the palace. Though we cannot know for certain, myth and ritual often intertwine, each reflecting fragments of truth. What we do know is that the Minoans created a spiritual world so rich, so distinctive, that it left impressions strong enough to echo through Greek mythology centuries later. The sacred balance. At its heart, Minoan religion seems to have been about balance. Balance between men and women, between human and animal, between nature and divinity. The priestesses raised their arms in invocation, the bulls thundered through the courtyards, the labyrinth shone in ritual sacrifice. Together, these elements created a spiritual world where harmony was sought, not domination, where life was celebrated, not denied. It is this balance that makes Minoan religion so captivating to us today. In their art and rituals, we see a civilization that embraced joy, vitality, and connection as sacred values. Looking ahead. Tonight, we have stepped into the sacred world of Knossos. We have seen the priestesses leading rituals, the bulls charging in sacred games, the labyrinths gleaming in the torchlight. We have heard the music, felt the rhythm, and glimpsed the mystery of the snake goddess. But religion does not exist in isolation. It is entwined with story, with myth, with the tales that carry meaning across generations. In the next part of our journey, we will step into the world of Minoan mythology, exploring the legends of Minos, the Minotaur, and Ariadne's thread. We will see how history became story, and how story became legend, weaving the Minoans into the timeless fabric of myth. Night has fallen over Crete. The palace of Knossos lies silent in the moonlight, its painted walls and grand courtyards at rest. But as quiet as the ruins may seem, there are stories here that never sleep. Stories whispered across centuries, passed from lips to ears, retold in markets, in temples, and around fires. They are stories that blend truth with imagination, history with dream. They are the myths of Crete, tales of kings and gods, of monsters and heroes, of love, betrayal, and labyrinths. Tonight, we step into the realm of myth. We will wander through the legends that swirl around Knossos, beginning with the story that has defined it in the imagination of the world, the birth of the Minotaur and the Labyrinth. The story of Europa. Before there was the Minotaur, there was Europa. The myth begins not in Crete, but on the shores of Phoenicia, where a princess named Europa once lived. One day, as she played with her companions, Zeus, the king of the gods, saw her and was struck by desire. To approach her without fear, he transformed himself into a magnificent bull, its hide gleaming white as snow, its form strong yet gentle. Europa, charmed by the bull's beauty, climbed upon its back. In an instant, Zeus carried her across the sea, leaping over waves until they reached the shores of Crete. There, beneath the shade of cypress trees, he revealed himself in his divine form. From their union came 3 sons, Minos, Rhadamanthys, and Sarpedon. Each would grow to be a king or a judge of the dead, but Minos, the eldest, would rule Knossos and shape the destiny of Crete. This myth already entwines Crete with the bull, a sacred image we have seen woven through Minoan art and ritual. It is no coincidence that the bull appears at the very beginning of the island's legendary story. King Minos and Poseidon's bull. As Minos sought to claim the throne of Crete, he prayed to Poseidon, god of the sea, for a sign of his favor. Poseidon answered by sending forth from the waves a magnificent bull, so perfect and divine that it dazzled all who saw it. Minos was to sacrifice this bull to the god in gratitude, but the animal was so beautiful that Minos could not bring himself to kill it. Instead, he kept it for his own herds and sacrificed another in its place. Poseidon, angered by this betrayal, decided to punish Minos. He turned his wrath not upon the king directly, but upon his wife, Queen Pasiphae. The goddess of desire, Aphrodite, or perhaps Poseidon himself, depending on the version of the tale, cursed her with unnatural longing for the sacred bull. The birth of the Minotaur. Haunted by desire, Pasiphae turned to the great craftsman Daedalus, who was living at Knossos under the patronage of Minos. She begged him to create a device that would allow her to satisfy the curse. Daedalus, ingenious and obedient, constructed a hollow wooden cow, covered in hide, within which Pasiphae could conceal herself. From this union of woman and bull was born a creature unlike any other, the Minotaur. Half man, half bull, it possessed the body of a man but the head and strength of a beast. The child was monstrous, yet it was also Minos's own blood, the offspring of his queen. Ashamed yet unable to destroy the creature, Minos sought a way to contain it. Once more he turned to Daedalus, who now built a structure that would become legend, the Labyrinth. The Labyrinth. Imagine it, a vast maze of stone, its corridors twisting endlessly, its stairways rising and falling, its paths leading always deeper into confusion. Daedalus, master of invention, designed the labyrinth so cunningly that once inside, no one could ever find their way out. It was here that the Minotaur was imprisoned, fed on sacrifices, a dark secret hidden beneath the palace of Knossos. The Greeks told of youths and maidens sent from Athens as tribute to Minos, to wander the labyrinth until they met the beast. Whether the Minotaur devoured them or they simply perished in the maze mattered little, the story was one of fear, of domination, and of mystery. And so, the palace of Knossos became forever linked to the labyrinth, its complexity echoing in the myth. To later generations, the winding corridors of the real palace seemed proof of the tale, as if the myth itself had grown from the stones. Theseus and Ariadne. But every monster must meet a hero. For the Minotaur, that hero was Theseus, prince of Athens. Athens, under the yoke of Crete, was forced to send 7 young men and 7 young women as tribute to Knossos. Theseus volunteered to go, determined to end the terror. When he arrived in Crete, Minos's daughter Ariadne saw him and fell in love. Knowing that he would surely die in the labyrinth without help, she gave him a gift, a ball of thread. As Theseus entered the maze, he tied one end of the thread at the entrance and unrolled it as he walked. Deep within the labyrinth, he confronted the Minotaur. With courage and strength, he slew the beast. Then, following the thread, he found his way back to the entrance, victorious. Ariadne fled with Theseus, but their love was not to last. On the island of Naxos, he abandoned her, whether by choice, accident, or divine will depends on the telling. Yet her gift, the thread, remains one of the most enduring images of myth, the guide through confusion, the path through the darkness, the symbol of wisdom and love. Myth and memory. What do these stories tell us of the Minoans? Were they merely Greek inventions, spun centuries later to explain the ruins of Knossos? Or do they carry fragments of memory, echoes of real rituals and beliefs? Consider the bull, sacred in Minoan religion, central to both myth and ritual. Consider the labyrinthine design of the palace, with its endless rooms and corridors. Consider the role of priestesses, mirrored in the figure of Ariadne, who guides the hero through the maze. Myths, after all, are not created from nothing. They grow from the soil of memory, transformed by imagination. The Minotaur may never have walked the halls of Knossos, but the myths reflect truths about Minoan culture, their reverence for the bull, their complex palaces, their sacred rituals. Through Greek eyes, these became monsters and mazes, but beneath the myth lies the echo of reality. Daedalus and Icarus. The myths of Knossos do not end with the Minotaur. Daedalus, the craftsman who built the wooden cow in the labyrinth, became a figure of legend himself. Imprisoned by Minos to keep his secrets, he crafted wings of feathers and wax for himself and his son Icarus. Together they flew from Crete, soaring into the sky. But Icarus, exhilarated, flew too close to the sun. The wax melted, and he fell into the sea. The story of Daedalus and Icarus is one of the most famous myths of all time, a tale of invention, ambition, and tragic loss. It, too, is bound to Knossos, reminding us that Crete was a place where myth and innovation intertwined. Ariadne's thread through time. The image of Ariadne's thread has endured for millennia. It is not only a mythic tool, but a metaphor. To this day, we speak of a thread as something that guides us through complexity, whether in thought, in storytelling, or in life itself. From the palace of Knossos, a single mythic thread has stretched across centuries, weaving its way into language, philosophy, and imagination. In this way, the myths of Knossos are not just ancient stories. They are living legacies, threads that connect us to the Minoans across the gulf of time. The mythic landscape. As you imagine Crete beneath the stars, consider how myths transform landscapes. The mountains, caves, and palaces of Crete were not mere places, they were stages upon which stories unfolded. A cave might be the birthplace of Zeus. A mountain peak might be the site of sacrifice. A winding palace might be the labyrinth itself. For the people of the past, myth and place were inseparable. Every stone, every hill, every chamber carried echoes of story. And so it is with Knossos. To walk its halls is not only to step through ruins, but to wander through myth. Every corridor whispers of the Minotaur. Every stairwell recalls Daedalus. Every courtyard feels the presence of Ariadne's thread. Looking ahead. Tonight, we have wandered through myth, the abduction of Europa, the curse of Pasiphae, the birth of the Minotaur, and the heroism of Theseus. These stories may not be history, but they carry truth in their symbols, their echoes, and their power to endure. In the next part of our journey, we will turn from myth back to history, exploring how the Minoans became masters of the sea. We will sail with their ships, trade with their merchants, and see how the waters of the Aegean carried them into wealth, power, and legend. Picture dawn breaking over the harbor of ancient Crete. The sea glimmers gold beneath the rising sun, and the air is alive with sound, sailors shouting, ropes creaking, gulls calling overhead. Wooden ships line the shore, their prows carved into elegant curves, their sails furled for the morning's journey. Amphorae filled with wine and olive oil are loaded carefully onto decks. Pottery painted with dolphins and spirals is stacked in baskets. Bronze tools, woolen cloth, and jars of honey are prepared for trade. This is the world of the Minoans, the first great seafarers of Europe. Their island home made them turn naturally to the sea, and from it they built a network of trade that stretched across the Aegean and beyond. Tonight, let us sail with them. We will leave the shores of Crete, journey to distant ports, and see how trade shaped their civilization into one of the most prosperous of the Bronze Age. Crete as crossroads. Geography was destiny for the Minoans. Crete lies at the very center of the eastern Mediterranean, a natural bridge between Europe, Asia, and Africa. To the north, the islands of the Cyclades lead toward mainland Greece. To the east, Cyprus and the Levant beckon. To the south lies Egypt, with its fertile Nile Valley and monumental cities. To the west stretch the waters toward Italy and beyond. From this position, Crete was never isolated. It was always connected, a meeting place for cultures, goods, and ideas. The Minoans did not merely sail for survival, they sailed for opportunity. And in doing so, they became merchants of the sea, their ships carrying their influence to every shore. The ships of the Minoans. Imagine stepping aboard a Minoan ship. Long and sleek, its hull carved from sturdy timbers, it was designed for speed and agility. A single mast rose from its center, carrying a square sail, while rows of oars allowed the crew to propel it in calm winds. The prow often curved upward, decorated with carvings of animals or waves, giving the ship both grace and power. These vessels were not built for war, like the later triremes of Greece. They were built for trade. Their holds carried amphorae of olive oil, jars of wine, baskets of grain, and crates of pottery. Their decks bore merchants and sailors, musicians and storytellers, bringing not only goods but culture across the sea. The sea was their highway, and the ships were their lifeblood. Without them, Knossos and the other palaces could never have thrived. Exports from Crete. What did the Minoans trade? Their island was rich in resources and crafts. Olive oil, pressed from the groves that blanketed Crete, olive oil was a staple of life. It was used in cooking, in lamps, in religious rituals, and as a valuable commodity abroad. Wine, vineyards produced wine that was stored in amphorae, traded to lands where grapes were less plentiful. Pottery, perhaps their most iconic export, Minoan pottery was prized for its beauty and design. Painted with dolphins, octopuses, spirals, and lilies, it carried the spirit of Crete to foreign tables. Textiles, wool from sheep and goats was spun into brightly colored fabrics, woven into garments that were sought after in distant lands. Bronze crafts, using imported copper and tin, Minoan smiths created tools, weapons, and ornaments that found eager buyers abroad. Honey and perfumes. Beekeeping flourished on Crete, and honey was a sweet luxury. Perfumed oils, mixed with herbs and flowers, became another valued product. Each of these goods carried with it not only material value but cultural meaning. To own Minoan pottery was to own a piece of artistry. To taste their wine was to share in their rituals. In this way, trade was both economic and cultural. Imports to Crete. Trade is never one-sided. As their ships carried goods outward, they also brought back treasures from abroad. Metals, copper from Cyprus, tin from distant lands like Anatolia or even as far as Britain, essential for making bronze. Ivory, from Egypt and Syria, used for carving delicate figurines and inlays. Gold, from Egypt and Nubia, turned into jewelry that adorned the priestesses and elites of Knossos. Precious stones, carnelian, lapis lazuli, and faience beads, exotic materials that gave their jewelry color and rarity. Ideas and art, perhaps more important than goods, were ideas. From Egypt, they borrowed motifs of nature and ceremony. From Mesopotamia, they may have learned about seals and record-keeping. From every port, they absorbed and transformed influences into something uniquely Minoan. Crete was enriched not only in wealth, but in imagination. Trade made them cosmopolitan, shaping their culture into one of openness and innovation. Ports and palaces. Trade was not carried out by isolated individuals, but by the palace system itself. Knossos, Phaistos, Malea, and Zakros all stood as centers of administration, their storerooms filled with goods waiting to be shipped. The palaces acted like hubs in a network, organizing production, storing surplus, and redistributing wealth. Nearby harbors bustled with activity. At Zakros on the eastern coast, the palace sat directly above a natural port, its storerooms packed with imported goods. At Kamos in the south, ships came and went with cargo bound for Egypt and beyond. These ports connected Crete to the wider Mediterranean, turning the island into a maritime empire without walls. The reach of Minoan trade. Archaeological evidence shows the astonishing reach of Minoan trade. Their pottery has been found on the Greek mainland, in the Cyclades, on Cyprus, in Anatolia, in the Levant, and even in Egypt. In return, Egyptian artifacts, scarabs, faience, and carved ivories, have been found on Crete. Picture a Minoan ship sailing into the Nile Delta. Egyptian merchants meet them, offering gold and grain, papyrus, and perfumes. The Minoans present their painted pottery, their jars of oil and wine. Hands exchange goods, voices exchange stories, and cultures blend in the moment of trade. These encounters enriched both sides, weaving the Mediterranean into a tapestry of connection. Peace and the sea. One of the most remarkable aspects of Minoan trade is its apparent lack of violence. Unlike later Mycenaean or Phoenician ships, which often carried warriors or pirates, Minoan vessels seem to have been built for commerce, not war. Their island shows little evidence of fortifications, suggesting that their control of the sea came not from conquest but from influence. Some scholars even speak of a Minoan thalassocracy, a rule of the sea. Whether or not they truly ruled, the Minoans certainly dominated trade routes, their ships so prevalent that their presence ensured security. Their power lay not in armies, but in networks. Culture on the move. Trade was not only about goods. It was about culture. As Minoan ships sailed from port to port, they carried stories, songs, rituals, and images. Their frescoes, with dolphins and lilies, echoed Egyptian and Near Eastern styles yet remained distinctively Minoan. Their language, still undeciphered in its linear A script, may have been shared or adapted in trade exchanges. In this way, Crete became more than an island, it became a cultural bridge. Ideas flowed as freely as wine, shaping not only the Minoans themselves but the civilizations around them. The sailor's life. What was it like to be a sailor in Minoan times? Imagine the creak of oars as you push out to sea, the salty spray on your face, the rhythm of waves beneath the hull. Days were long, the work hard, but the promise of adventure lay ahead. Each voyage carried risk, storms, pirates, or the simple uncertainty of navigating vast waters. But it also carried reward, new sights, new goods, new friendships. At night, sailors guided themselves by the stars, just as mariners have for millennia. They slept on deck, wrapped in cloaks, dreaming of the harbors ahead. Their songs may have been filled with the rhythm of waves, their prayers whispered to Poseidon or local sea gods, asking for calm waters and safe return. The wealth of Knossos. All of this trade flowed back to Knossos, filling its storerooms, funding its festivals, and sustaining its people. The wealth of the palace was not only in gold and goods, but in the ability to sustain a civilization built on art, ritual, and joy. Without trade, the frescoes, the festivals, the labyrinthine palaces might never have existed. With trade, they flourished. A civilization of connection. When we think of ancient civilizations, we often picture walls, armies, and conquests. But the Minoans remind us of another path, a civilization built on connection. Their ships were their walls, their harbors their fortresses, their trade their conquest. They spread influence not by the sword, but by the sail. It is this spirit of openness that makes them so captivating. The Minoans did not withdraw into isolation. They reached outward, across the sea, and in doing so they became one of the great cultures of the Bronze Age. Looking ahead. Tonight, we have sailed with the Minoans, watched their ships glide across the waves, and seen their goods exchanged in bustling harbors. Trade was the lifeblood of their civilization, the force that carried them into prosperity and legend. But trade alone does not tell the full story. Behind the ships and the markets were people, men and women whose roles in society shaped the culture of Crete. In the next part of our journey, we will look more closely at one of the most remarkable features of Minoan life, the prominent role of women. Priestesses, leaders, artisans, and symbols of fertility, they stand at the center of frescoes and rituals, offering us a glimpse of a society that valued balance and harmony between the genders. Picture the frescoes of Knossos once more. Women stand at the center of the painted scenes, their garments colorful, their hair arranged in elaborate curls. They raise their arms in ritual, dance in circles, or process in long lines carrying gifts. Unlike many ancient cultures, where women are often absent or secondary in art, the Minoans placed them prominently, often larger than men, often central in ceremonies. What did this mean? What role did women play in Minoan society? Tonight, we step into their world. We will walk through their lives, from priestesses to artisans, from mothers to dancers, and try to understand how this ancient civilization placed women in positions of visibility, influence, and perhaps even authority. Women in the frescoes. The first thing any visitor to Knossos notices is the art. In fresco after fresco, women are present, not in the background, not as passive figures, but as active participants. They are shown wearing flounced skirts with layered ruffles, fitted bodices that expose the breasts, and jewelry of gold and beads. Their skin is painted lighter than that of men, following an artistic convention found in Egypt as well, but their postures are strong, their gestures commanding. They carry offerings, they lead processions, they stand beside altars. The prominence of women in Minoan art suggests that they were not invisible in public life. On the contrary, they were celebrated, honored, and depicted as central to the rhythms of ritual and ceremony. Priestesses and sacred roles. Perhaps the most striking role for women in Minoan society was that of priestesses. Archaeological evidence, frescoes, figurines, and shrines suggests that women held significant religious authority. Imagine a priestess standing before an altar in the central courtyard of Knossos. She lifts her arms in invocation, her bracelets gleaming in the sunlight. Behind her, musicians play flutes, and the crowd watches in reverent silence. She is not only a representative of the people but a bridge to the divine. The famous figurines of the snake goddess, found at Knossos, depict women with serpents coiled in their hands. Whether these figures represent goddesses or priestesses, they show women as holders of sacred power. Their garments, their posture, their steady gaze, everything about them conveys authority and divinity. If women were indeed the leaders of rituals, then they shaped the spiritual life of the civilization, guiding festivals, sacrifices, and ceremonies. This was no small role, it placed them at the heart of Minoan culture. Women in daily life. Beyond the sacred, what of daily life? Frescoes show women weaving, gathering flowers, and participating in festivals. They likely managed households, raised children, and oversaw the preparation of food. But they also seem to have had freedom of movement. Unlike in many later cultures, Minoan women are depicted outside, in fields of lilies, at ceremonies, or in public spaces. This suggests that they were not confined to the home, but active participants in community life. They may have taken part in trade, craft production, and local administration, though the evidence is fragmentary. What is clear is that they were visible, not hidden, and their roles were valued. Women in ceremony and dance. Dance and music were central to Minoan culture, and women often appear in these contexts. Frescoes show them with arms raised, moving in circles, their skirts flaring with motion. In one scene, women pick saffron crocuses, their baskets filled with flowers, perhaps as offerings in ritual. Dance may have been more than entertainment. It was a form of worship, a way to embody the rhythms of nature and the divine. For women to be shown dancing in ritual spaces suggests that they were active participants in the spiritual life of the community, not passive spectators. Symbols of fertility and renewal. Women were also linked to fertility, both human and agricultural. The connection between female figures, snakes, and flowers in Minoan art suggests a symbolic association with renewal, life cycles, and rebirth. In an agrarian society, fertility was sacred, tied to the growth of crops, the health of animals, and the continuity of families. By embodying these symbols, women were not only biological mothers but cultural mothers, figures who sustained the community through their association with abundance and renewal. Comparison with other cultures. What makes the role of women in Minoan society so striking is how it differs from other ancient civilizations. In Egypt, queens held power but were exceptions. In Mesopotamia, women's roles were largely domestic, with limited public authority. In later Greece, women were confined to the household, with little say in public life. But in Minoan Crete, women appear everywhere, in frescoes, in rituals, in festivals. They are not hidden or silent. They are central. This suggests a society with a different balance, one where gender roles were more complementary, and where women held visible authority, especially in the sacred realm. The question of queenship. Was there a queen in Knossos? Some scholars suggest that the throne room of Knossos, with its griffin frescoes and central seat, may have belonged not to a king, but to a queen or high priestess. If so, then women may have held political as well as religious power. The evidence is not conclusive. We do not have written records in a deciphered language to confirm it. But the prominence of women in art and ritual makes the idea plausible. Even if queens did not rule outright, women clearly played roles of influence and authority within the palace system. Clothing and identity. Clothing itself tells us something of women's role. The elaborate skirts, bodices, and jewelry seen in frescoes were not only functional garments, they were symbols of status and identity. To wear such attire was to proclaim participation in ritual and ceremony. Clothing may have also marked stages of life: maiden, mother, priestess. Hairstyles, jewelry, and garments all carried meaning, signaling a woman's role within the community. In this way, fashion was not vanity but a language, a way of expressing belonging and authority. The legacy of Ariadne. In myth, the role of women in Crete is also remembered. Ariadne, daughter of Minos, gave Theseus the thread that allowed him to escape the labyrinth. She is remembered not as a passive princess, but as a guide, a savior, the one whose wisdom ensured success. Ariadne may be myth, but she reflects the reality of Minoan women's prominence. Her story echoes the memory of priestesses and leaders who guided rituals and perhaps guided communities as well. In her, we glimpse the thread of continuity between history and legend. A balanced society. Were the Minoans truly egalitarian, a society where men and women shared equal power? We must be cautious. Archaeology shows prominence, but not full equality. Men are also present in rituals, in administration, in daily life. Yet the visibility of women in Minoan art suggests a balance unusual in the ancient world. Rather than domination by one gender, Minoan society seems to have celebrated duality, male and female, human and animal, earth and sky. It was a culture built on harmony, and women were central to that harmony. A day in the life of a Minoan woman. Close your eyes and imagine the life of a Minoan woman. She wakes in a stone house at dawn, the light spilling in through a window. She prepares bread from barley, kneads it with honey, and sets it to bake. She dresses in a colorful skirt, fastens jewelry at her neck, and braids her hair. If she is an artisan, she joins other women at the loom, weaving bright textiles that will be traded abroad. If she is a priestess, she walks to the palace, where she prepares offerings and leads rituals in the courtyard. If she is a mother, she tends to her children, teaching them the rhythms of life, guiding them in games and work. At festival time, she joins processions, carrying flowers or vessels, her steps in harmony with music and drums. In the evening, she returns to her family, sharing food and stories, resting in the glow of firelight. Her life is not without labor or hardship, but it is full of visibility, dignity, and connection. Looking ahead. Tonight, we have walked with the women of Knossos, seen their garments, shared their rituals, and glimpsed their prominence in art and society. They remind us that civilizations are not only built by kings and warriors, but by women whose influence shapes culture at its deepest levels. In the next part of our journey, we will explore the sacred symbols of Minoan power more fully, the thrones, the horns, and the double axes that marked authority and ritual in Knossos. These objects, imbued with meaning, will guide us deeper into the symbolic language of the Minoans. The palace of Knossos was not only a place of storerooms and frescoes. It was a palace of symbols. Everywhere you look, on walls, on altars, on carved stone, you find images that carry deep meaning for the Minoans. Unlike a modern alphabet or written constitution, their power was not inscribed in laws, but in symbols. These symbols were visible, tangible reminders of sacred authority and cosmic balance. Tonight, we step into the symbolic heart of the Minoans. We will sit before their thrones, walk past their horns, and lift the weight of their double axes. We will ask what these objects meant, how they were used, and what they reveal about the civilization that placed them at the center of their culture. The throne of Knossos. Perhaps the most famous object in the palace is the so-called throne of Minos, located in the throne room of Knossos. Imagine entering this chamber. It is small, intimate, with benches lining the walls for attendants or participants. On the far wall sits a stone chair, carved with simple elegance, its back rising in a curve. Beside it, painted griffins face inward, their wings raised, their gazes fierce and protective. At the center of the room stands a stone basin, perhaps used for purification. The throne itself is not large or ostentatious. It is not gilded in gold or encrusted with jewels, as one might expect for a king. Instead, it is modest, carved from gypsum, a stone native to Crete. Its simplicity is striking and suggestive. Was this truly the throne of a king? Some scholars think not. The prominence of women in Minoan religion and the symbolic associations of the griffin suggest it may have been the seat of a priestess, perhaps the high priestess of Knossos, presiding over rituals in a role of both sacred and political authority. Whether king or priestess, the throne embodied more than individual power. It was the symbol of the connection between human and divine. To sit in it was to mediate between people and gods, to hold the balance of the community. Horns of consecration. All across Knossos, and throughout Crete, you find a curious symbol carved from stone or represented in frescoes, two great curving horns, rising upward in a shape unmistakably reminiscent of a bull. These are known as the horns of consecration. Placed on palace roofs, altars, and shrines, the horns symbolize the sacred presence of the bull, a creature central to Minoan religion. They may have marked a space as consecrated, set apart for ritual use. To pass beneath them was to step into the realm of the sacred. Imagine walking into the central courtyard of Knossos during a festival. Above the crowd, great stone horns rise against the sky. They frame the space, reminding everyone present that what happens here is not ordinary but divine. The horns connect the ceremony to the sacred bull, to fertility, strength, and the cosmic cycles of life. In this way, the horns were more than decoration. They were markers of sacred space, visible signs of consecration and power. The Labyrinth, the double axe. Of all Minoan symbols, none is more enigmatic than the Labyrinth, the double axe. It appears carved into stone, painted on walls, and inscribed onto small objects. Some Labyrinths were ceremonial, crafted from bronze or even gold, far too large to be practical tools. What did it mean? Theories abound. Some see the Labyrinth as a symbol of sacrifice, an instrument used in the ritual slaughter of bulls or other animals. Others see it as a lightning symbol, representing divine power striking from the heavens. Still others interpret it as a representation of balance, the union of opposites, male and female, life and death, earth and sky. Whatever its precise meaning, the Labyrinth was sacred. It may have been linked to the goddess, just as the horns were linked to the bull. In rituals, priestesses may have carried small Labyrinths as symbols of their authority, while larger ones stood on altars as objects of veneration. The very word labyrinth, the place of the Labyrinth, may have been derived from this symbol. If so, then Knossos itself was not only a labyrinth of corridors, but a labyrinth of sacred axes, a house of ritual power. Sacred stones and beetles. Another symbol of power in Minoan religion was the beetle, or sacred stone. These were often upright stones placed in sanctuaries or courtyards, objects of worship that may have been seen as dwellings of the divine. Some were small enough to fit in the hand, rubbed or kissed by worshippers in acts of devotion. Others stood taller, markers of sacred presence. Like the horns and the Labyrinth, the beetle reminded the Minoans of their god's immanence, the idea that the divine dwelled not far away in distant heavens, but here, in stones, animals, and natural places. Symbolism in architecture. The palace itself was a symbol. Its labyrinthine design embodied mystery and complexity. Its light wells symbolized openness and illumination. Its frescoes carried symbols of fertility, abundance, and harmony. Every corridor, every column, every chamber was imbued with meaning, turning the palace into a living temple. Symbols were not confined to altars, they were woven into architecture. A column painted red was not only structural, but a reminder of vitality. A spiral painted on pottery was not only decorative, but an echo of the endless cycles of nature. In this way, the entire palace was a symbolic landscape, a microcosm of the Minoan worldview. Ritual power. Symbols are not inert. To the Minoans, they carried power. To sit on the throne was to embody sacred authority. To pass beneath the horns was to step into consecrated space. To lift the Labyrinth was to wield divine energy. Ritual gave these symbols life. In festivals, priestesses may have processed with Labyrinths raised high, chanting prayers as they moved beneath the horns. Sacrifices may have been made before the throne, with libations poured into the stone basin. The presence of the community, the rhythm of music and dance, charged these symbols with power, turning stone and metal into vessels of meaning. The union of symbols. Taken together, these symbols, throne, horns, Labyrinth, form a triad of sacred authority. The throne represents human leadership, mediating between people and gods. The horns represent animal vitality and consecration of space. The Labyrinth represents divine power and cosmic balance. Together, they weave a symbolic system that guided Minoan religion and governance. They remind us that the Minoans did not separate sacred from secular, or political from spiritual. Power was always sacred, always symbolic, always embedded in ritual. Symbols beyond Crete. Interestingly, some of these symbols appear beyond Crete. Horns of consecration and Labyrinths have been found on the Greek mainland and in the Aegean Islands, suggesting that Minoan influence spread through trade and culture. The symbols carried weight not only in Crete but across the wider world, shaping the imagination of other peoples. This spread of symbols reminds us that Minoan power was not enforced by armies but by culture. Their influence traveled in images, in rituals, in the symbolic language that others adopted and adapted. The enduring power of symbols. Symbols have a way of enduring even when civilizations fall. The throne of Knossos, the horns, and the Labyrinth have outlasted the Minoan world itself. they remain with us, reminders of a civilization that saw meaning in every object, every form, every gesture. To stand before the throne today is to feel the weight of presence, as if the seat is still waiting for its priestess. To walk past the horns is to sense the sacred, even in silence. To look upon a labyrinth is to glimpse the mystery of a symbol that has defied complete explanation for thousands of years. The Minoans are gone, but their symbols still speak. Looking ahead. Tonight, we have walked among the symbols of Minoan power. We have sat in the throne room, stood beneath the horns of consecration, and lifted the labyrinths in ritual imagination. These objects, though silent, carry meaning that echoes across time. In the next part of our journey, we will turn from symbols to sounds, from objects to music. We will explore how the Minoans celebrated with song, dance, and festival, filling their courtyards with joy and rhythm. For if symbols were the language of their gods, music and dance were the language of their hearts. Close your eyes and step once more into the central courtyard of Knossos. It is evening now, the sun dipping low over the Cretan mountains, the air warm and fragrant with the scent of wild thyme and olive wood smoke. Torches flicker to life, their flames casting golden light across the painted walls of the palace. Slowly, the courtyard fills. Musicians arrive first, carrying flutes and drums, lyres and rattles. Then dancers step forward, their skirts and kilts swaying with movement, their jewelry gleaming in the torchlight. Finally, the people gather, their voices rising in anticipation. Tonight is a festival, a celebration of life, of gods, of community. Tonight, music and dance will fill Knossos with sound and joy. Music in the Minoan world. The Minoans left us no written scores, no notation to tell us exactly how their music sounded. Yet fragments of instruments, depictions in frescoes, and parallels from neighboring cultures give us clues. Imagine the sound of double pipes, similar to the Greek aulos, their twin reeds producing a melody both haunting and vibrant. Drums made from stretched animal skins keep rhythm, their steady beat echoing in the chest. Small cymbals clash in time, while lyres strum soft harmonies. Rattles shake, flutes sing, and voices rise in chant. The music was not a quiet background, it was the pulse of ritual and celebration. It guided dancers' steps, marked the rhythms of sacrifice, and carried prayers skyward. It was communal, performed not only by specialists but by the people themselves. To live in Knossos was to live in a world where music wove through daily life, from work songs in the fields to grand ceremonies in the palace. Dance as worship. Dance, too, was central to Minoan culture. Frescoes show women and men in flowing movement, arms raised, feet stepping in rhythm. They dance in circles, in lines, in pairs, their garments swirling around them like waves. Dance was not simply entertainment. It was worship. It embodied the cycles of nature, the turning of seasons, the rising and setting of the sun. It was a way to connect the body with the divine, to express joy, devotion, and harmony. Imagine a line of dancers moving through the courtyard, their steps echoing the beat of drums. They lift their arms toward the horns of consecration, toward the starry sky above. Each movement is both symbolic and joyful, a language of the body that speaks to gods and community alike. Festivals of the seasons. The Minoans lived by the rhythms of the natural world, and their festivals reflected this. Spring festivals, celebrating renewal, fertility, and the blossoming of flowers. Processions carried lilies and crocuses, offerings made to goddesses of fertility. Dancers moved through fields as music filled the air. Harvest festivals, marking the gathering of wheat, barley, grapes, and olives. Communal feasts celebrated abundance, with wine flowing freely, bread shared, and honey cakes offered to the gods. Rites of passage, festivals likely marked the stages of life, birth, initiation into adulthood, marriage, and death. Each moment of transition was honored with ritual, music, and dance. Bull ceremonies, perhaps the most dramatic, these festivals centered around the bull leaping ritual. Acrobats faced the charging animal, seizing its horns and vaulting into the air, their movements part athleticism, part worship, part spectacle. Each festival blended sacred and communal life, uniting the people of Knossos in shared experience. Processions through the palace. One of the most famous frescoes from Knossos is the procession fresco, which shows long lines of men carrying vessels, walking with solemn dignity. Imagine such a procession during a festival, participants dressed in their finest garments, carrying offerings of wine, oil, flowers, or animals. They move slowly through the corridors of the palace, past frescoed walls, into the central courtyard where the priestesses wait. The procession itself was ritual. Every step, every gesture, every offering carried meaning. It was a way of weaving the community together, a way of showing devotion through movement and order. Feasting and celebration. No festival would be complete without feasting. After rituals and dances, the community gathered to share food and drink. Tables were set with bread, cheese, figs, and roasted meats. Wine flowed from amphorae into cups. Honey cakes were passed around, their sweetness a reminder of the blessings of nature. The feast was not only about nourishment but about unity. To eat together was to affirm belonging, to share in the abundance of the land and sea. Laughter mingled with song, children played among the tables, and the joy of life was felt in every bite. Music of the gods. Music in Minoan culture was more than human art, it was divine. To play the flute, to beat the drum, to sing in chorus was to participate in the cosmic harmony of the universe. Music carried prayers upward, soothed the soul, and brought the community into alignment with the gods. Perhaps the sound of pipes was thought to echo the wind in the mountains, or the beat of drums the heartbeat of the earth. By joining these natural rhythms, the Minoans felt themselves part of a larger order. Their music was not separate from the world but an expression of it. Children and festivals. Festivals were not only for adults. Children, too, participated, learning the rhythms of their culture through music and dance. They carried flowers in processions, learned the steps of ritual dances, and joined in the feasting. In this way, each generation was initiated into the traditions of the community, ensuring that the rhythms of music and worship would continue unbroken. Bull leaping as performance. We must pause again at the bull leaping ritual, for it combined all elements of Minoan festival, music, dance, ritual, and spectacle. Imagine the courtyard filled with people, the air alive with drums and flutes. A great bull is led forward, its muscles rippling, its horns sharp. The crowd hushes. A young acrobat steps out, poised and ready. The bull charges. At the last moment, the acrobat seizes its horns, vaults into the air, flips over its back, and lands gracefully behind it. The crowd erupts in cheers, music swells, and the ritual continues. Was this sport? Worship? A rite of passage? Perhaps all three. What is clear is that it was central to their festivals, a performance that embodied courage, grace, and the sacred union of human and animal. The role of priestesses. Throughout these festivals, priestesses presided. They accepted offerings, led chants, and guided processions. Their garments were rich with color, their jewelry gleaming in torchlight. They stood at the center of ceremony, embodying both authority and devotion. To see a priestess in such a festival was to see the living link between people and gods, between ritual and community. Her presence gave shape and meaning to the celebration, ensuring that every dance, every song, every offering was directed toward the sacred. Nightfall in Knossos. As the festival drew to a close, the torches still flickered, the last notes of flutes fading into the night. People returned to their homes, weary but joyful, their hearts full of the music and movement that had bound them together. The palace quieted once more, its walls now echoing with silence, but the memory of festival lingered in every stone. For the Minoans, life was not a dull march of days. It was a rhythm, a dance, a song. Music, dance, and festivals gave meaning to existence, reminding them that they were part of something larger, something sacred, something joyous. Looking ahead. Tonight, we have joined the Minoans in festival, heard their music, felt their dance, and shared their feasts. We have seen how joy, ritual, and community were woven together in sound and movement. In the next part of our journey, we will travel beyond Knossos to the other palaces of Crete, Phaistos, Malea, and Zakros. Each had its own character, its own role in the network of Minoan civilization. Together, they form a constellation of centers that reveal the breadth and richness of the Minoan world. The Palace of Knossos may be the most famous, but it was not alone. Crete in the Bronze Age was a tapestry of palatial centers, each with its own character, its own people, its own rhythm of life. To truly understand the Minoan world, we must step beyond Knossos, traveling south to the broad Mycenaean plain, east to the fertile valleys of Malea, and further still to the hidden harbor of Zakros. Each palace was like a star in a constellation, shining with its own light yet connected to the others. Together, they formed the network of Minoan civilization, balancing trade, ritual, and community across the island. Tonight, let us wander these places, slowly and gently, as if we were travelers in the Bronze Age, moving from palace to palace under the endless Cretan sky. Phaistos, Palace of the Mycenaean Plain. Our journey begins in the south, where the fertile Mycenaean plain stretches wide between mountains and sea. Here lies Phaistos, second only to Knossos in size and importance. Imagine approaching it from the plain. The land around you is rich with olive groves and grain fields, the soil dark and fertile. The palace itself rises on a low hill, its terraces overlooking the broad plain and the distant sea. Unlike the labyrinthine complexity of Knossos, Phaistos feels open, airy, and balanced, its layout reflecting both grandeur and harmony. The central court of Phaistos, like that of Knossos, was the heart of the palace. Surrounding it were storerooms, workshops, and living quarters. Staircases climbed to upper levels, while wide terraces opened to the sun. The architecture, though less restored than Knossos, reveals a place of elegance and proportion. Phaistos is also home to one of archaeology's greatest mysteries, the Phaistos disc. Discovered in 1908, this clay disc is inscribed with spiraling symbols pressed into the clay with stamps, the earliest known example of movable type. Its script remains undeciphered, like linear A, and its purpose is unknown. Was it a hymn, a prayer, a record, or something else entirely? The disc sits in silence, a reminder of how much of the Minoan world remains hidden. Life at Phaistos mirrored that of Knossos, administration, ritual, craft, and trade. But the Mycenaean plain gave it a unique role. Its fertile fields fed the palace, and its access to the southern coast connected it to trade routes leading directly to Africa and the Levant. Phaistos was both granary and gateway, sustaining Crete's wealth through land and sea alike. Malea, Palace of Gold and Fertility. From the south, we travel east, to the fertile lowlands near the northern coast. Here lies Malea, another great Minoan palace, known for its golden jewelry and rich agricultural surroundings. Malea was slightly smaller than Knossos or Phaistos, but no less important. Its central court, storerooms, and workshops reveal a bustling center of administration and craft. Archaeologists have uncovered vast storage magazines filled with pithoi. Giant clay jars used to hold olive oil, grain, and wine. This abundance reflects the fertility of the region, where fields yielded harvests that sustained the palace and its people. Malea is also known for exquisite artifacts, particularly gold jewelry. Among the most famous is the bee pendant, a masterpiece of craftsmanship depicting two bees facing each other, holding a drop of honey between them. Its detail and elegance speak to the skill of Minoan goldsmiths and the symbolic importance of bees in their culture. Bees, after all, were symbols of fertility, community, and abundance, perfectly fitting for a palace surrounded by fertile land. Life at Malea was tied closely to agriculture. Farmers worked the fields, shepherds tended flocks, and traders carried goods to the nearby coast. Yet Malea also thrived on artistry, its workshops producing pottery, metalwork, and textiles that found their way across the Aegean. It was a palace of both fertility and refinement, embodying the dual gifts of land and craft. Zakros, the hidden harbor. Further east still, on the remote eastern coast of Crete, lies Zakros. Smaller than Knossos, Phaistos, or Malea, it nevertheless played a vital role in the Minoan network. Unlike the inland palaces, Zakros sat directly on the coast, its harbor a natural gateway to the eastern Mediterranean. Imagine sailing into Zakros. The bay is sheltered, the hills rising steeply behind it. The palace stands close to the water, its storerooms filled with imported goods, ivory from Egypt, faience beads from the Levant, copper from Cyprus. Zakros was Crete's window to the east, a hub of international trade. Archaeological discoveries at Zakros have been astonishing. The palace was preserved with remarkable detail, its storerooms still holding vessels and artifacts at the time of its destruction. Jars, tools, and luxury goods were found in place, frozen in time. Walking through Zakros today is like stepping into the past, the palace whispering its story more clearly than almost any other. Zakros also had a sacred dimension. Nearby caves served as ritual sites, and the palace itself likely hosted ceremonies tied to the sea. Its proximity to foreign goods and ideas may have given it a cosmopolitan air, a place where local tradition met international influence. Palatial network and balance. Knossos, Phaistos, Malea, and Zakros were not isolated. They formed a network, each contributing to the whole. Knossos, the largest, served as the political and ritual center. Phaistos anchored the fertile south. Malea drew on the richness of agriculture and artistry in the north. Zakros connected Crete to the wider world through its harbor. Together, these palaces balanced power and resources across the island. Goods flowed between them, rituals may have been coordinated, and the Minoan culture flourished in this web of interconnected centers. Unlike later empires that centralized everything in one city, the Minoans seem to have built a system of shared prominence, a constellation rather than a single star. Life around the palaces. Around each palace stretched towns and villages, home to farmers, artisans, and traders. The palaces were not isolated fortresses but hubs of community life. People came to the palaces to pay tribute, to participate in festivals, to work in workshops, or to store their surplus in the magazines. Imagine the Mycenaean plain filled with carts bringing grain to Phaistos, or the harbor of Zakros bustling with ships unloading copper and ivory. Imagine shepherds driving flocks past the walls of Malea, or villagers gathering at Knossos for a festival. The palaces were not only for elites, they were the heartbeat of the entire island. The destruction and rebuilding. All of the palaces, at different times, were destroyed and rebuilt, often by earthquakes or fires. This cycle of destruction and renewal is part of their story. The palaces we see today are often second palaces, rebuilt after disasters with even greater grandeur. This resilience reflects the strength of Minoan society. Yet eventually, in the mid-2nd millennium BCE, destruction came that could not be undone. Whether from natural disaster, invasion, or internal collapse, the palaces fell, and with them, the glory of the Minoan civilization. But before that final fall, they stood together in brilliance, each a jewel in the crown of Crete. A traveler's vision. Close your eyes and imagine yourself as a traveler in the Minoan world. You stand first at Knossos, marveling at its labyrinthine halls. Then you walk south to Phaistos, gazing across the vast Mycenaean plain. From there, you journey east to Malea, where artisans craft golden bees and farmers bring harvests to the palace. Finally, you sail to Zakros, entering a sheltered harbor where ships from Egypt and Cyprus unload their treasures. At each palace, you see the same culture, frescoes, rituals, storerooms, but with local flavors, local strengths. Together, they form a civilization that was greater than any one palace alone. Looking ahead. Tonight, we have walked beyond Knossos to see the other great palaces of Crete, Phaistos, Malea, and Zakros. Each added its own voice to the chorus of Minoan civilization, and together they created a harmony that resounded across the Aegean. But harmony can be fragile. The Minoans lived in a land of earthquakes, volcanoes, and shifting seas. In the next part of our journey, we will turn to the forces of nature, earthquakes and eruptions, that shook the foundations of their world, and perhaps contributed to their decline. Crete is a land of beauty, but also of danger. Its mountains rise sharply from the sea, shaped by tectonic forces that never truly rest. The earth beneath it shifts and rumbles, the sea around it churns with storms, and the horizon itself once erupted in fire and ash. The Minoans, for all their artistry and prosperity, lived in the shadow of nature's power. Tonight, we turn our attention to these forces, earthquakes that toppled palaces, volcanoes that darkened the skies, and the way the Minoans responded to disaster. Their civilization was resilient, rebuilding again and again, but in the end, nature may have played a role in their decline. A shaking land. Crete sits on the boundary between the African and Eurasian tectonic plates, a fault zone where the earth is never still. Even today, earthquakes rattle the island with unnerving frequency. For the Minoans, these tremors were a fact of life, as familiar as the rising of the sun or the turning of the seasons. Imagine standing in the courtyard of Knossos. The sun is bright, the air still. Then, without warning, the earth begins to tremble. Walls creak, jars topple, frescoes crack. The ground itself seems alive, shaking with power. People cry out, rush into the open, clutching children and vessels. Then, as suddenly as it began, the earth stills, leaving silence broken only by the sound of falling debris. Such moments must have been terrifying. To the Minoans, they may have been more than natural events. They were messages from the gods, signs of displeasure, warnings of imbalance. Rituals of appeasement may have followed, offerings made to calm the earth's fury. Destruction and renewal. The archaeological record shows that many Minoan palaces were destroyed by earthquakes, sometimes more than once. Walls collapsed, storerooms burned, temples crumbled. Yet again and again, the Minoans rebuilt. Knossos, Phaistos, Malea, and Zakros all went through cycles of destruction and renewal. Each time, the palaces were reconstructed, often on a grander scale. This resilience reveals both the danger they faced and their determination to endure. It is as though destruction was woven into the fabric of their culture, a cycle of death and rebirth mirrored in their rituals of fertility and renewal. The earth shook, but life continued. The volcano of Thera. If earthquakes were the heartbeat of danger, then the eruption of Thera was its thunderclap. Around the mid-2nd millennium BCE, the island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, north of Crete, erupted in one of the most powerful volcanic events in human history. The eruption began with earthquakes, shaking the island and the seas around it. Then, columns of ash and smoke rose into the sky, darkening the sun. Explosions sent rock and fire hurtling into the air. The sea boiled as magma met water, and finally, the volcano collapsed in a massive caldera, sending tsunamis racing across the Aegean. For the Minoans, who lived just 70 miles to the south, the effects would have been devastating. Ash and darkness. The eruption sent ash clouds high into the atmosphere, carried by winds across the Aegean and beyond. For weeks, perhaps months, the skies over Crete may have been dimmed. Crops withered, harvests failed, and famine loomed. The Minoans, so tied to agriculture and the cycles of nature, would have felt the impact deeply. In some places, layers of volcanic ash have been found, preserving plants and buildings like a time capsule. The eruption not only destroyed Thera itself but also scarred the wider region. Tsunami waves. Perhaps even more destructive than ash were the tsunamis. When the volcano collapsed into the sea, waves dozens of meters high surged outward. They crashed into the northern coast of Crete, smashing harbors, destroying ships, and flooding towns. Imagine standing at the port of Knossos near Knossos. The sea suddenly recedes, leaving fish flopping on the sand. People rush to gather them in confusion. Then, on the horizon, a wall of water rises. It crashes ashore with unimaginable force, sweeping away ships, houses, and lives. For a maritime culture like the Minoans, whose wealth and power depended on ships and harbors, such destruction would have been catastrophic. Psychological impact. Beyond physical destruction, the eruption must have shaken the Minoan spirit. Their gods were tied to nature, to cycles of fertility and balance. But what balance was left when the earth shook, the sky darkened, and the sea itself turned violent? Festivals and rituals may have taken on new urgency. Priests and priestesses may have struggled to explain or appease the gods' wrath. Communities may have been shaken not only in body but in faith. Theories of decline. Some scholars suggest that the eruption of Thera was the beginning of the end for the Minoans. The destruction of harbors and fleets weakened their trade networks. Crop failures undermined their economy. Social and religious confidence may have fractured. Yet others argue that the Minoans survived the eruption, rebuilding once again as they had after so many earthquakes. The final decline of their civilization, they suggest, came later, perhaps through invasion or internal collapse. Whatever the exact timeline, it is clear that the eruption left a deep mark. It was a disaster on a scale few civilizations had ever faced, and its shadow lingered over Crete. Mythic echoes. The memory of such an event may even have echoed in myth. Some have suggested that the story of Atlantis, told by Plato centuries later, was inspired by the destruction of Thera, a great island civilization lost to the sea in a single day. Whether true or not, the resonance is striking, a reminder of how disaster becomes story, and story becomes legend. The rhythm of nature. For the Minoans, disaster was not an exception but part of life. Earthquakes shook their palaces, volcanoes darkened their skies, tsunamis crashed upon their shores. Yet through it all, they lived, built, danced, and worshipped. Their resilience is as much a part of their story as their vulnerability. In their frescoes of dolphins and lilies, we see a people who celebrated life despite danger. In their festivals of dance and song, we hear a people who embraced joy despite uncertainty. They lived in harmony with nature, even as nature sometimes turned against them. A civilization tested. The story of the Minoans is not only one of prosperity but of endurance. They endured earthquakes, eruptions, and waves. They rebuilt again and again, refusing to let disaster end their culture. Only when multiple pressures combined, natural, economic, and perhaps military, did their civilization finally fade. But even then, their memory lived on, carried in myth, in ruins, in symbols of bulls and labyrinths. Looking ahead. Tonight, we have felt the ground shake beneath Knossos, seen the sky darken with ash, and heard the roar of waves upon the shore. We have stood with the Minoans as they faced the raw power of nature. In the next part of our journey, we will turn from nature to history, tracing the slow decline of the Minoans, the weakening of their trade, the rise of their rivals, and the fading of their once great civilization. Every civilization, no matter how vibrant, carries within it the seeds of change. For the Minoans, who once danced through the courtyards of Knossos, who painted dolphins on their walls and leapt with bulls under the summer sun, decline came not in a single moment, but in a slow unraveling. Archaeology gives us ruins and fragments. Frescoes cracked and faded, storerooms emptied, palaces toppled. What we do not have are voices. The Minoans left no deciphered text to tell their side of the story. We are left to piece together the tale of their decline from the stones, from myths, and from the echoes of history. Tonight, let us walk through this twilight, the centuries when the Minoans faltered, until their light was finally eclipsed by others. A civilization of cycles. The story of Minoan decline begins with their pattern of destruction and renewal. As we have seen, earthquakes regularly struck Crete, toppling palaces. Fires consumed storerooms. Yet each time, the Minoans rebuilt, sometimes with greater grandeur than before. Their civilization was resilient. But resilience has its limits. By the middle of the second millennium BCE, pressures, natural, social, and external, began to accumulate. The eruption of Thera dealt a heavy blow, weakening trade, devastating ports, and perhaps undermining faith in the gods who had failed to protect them. Though they endured, the cracks began to show. Signs of weakness. By around 1450 BCE, destruction swept across the island. Palaces at Phaistos, Malea, and Zakros were destroyed, many never rebuilt. Only Knossos survived, continuing as a center of power for another century. What caused this wave of destruction? The evidence is debated. Some suggest another series of earthquakes. Others see signs of invasion or conflict, with foreign warriors playing a role. Still others propose internal strife, perhaps rebellion or civil war. Whatever the cause, the pattern is clear. The Minoan world contracted, its palatial system shattered, its strength diminished. The Mycenaean shadow. At the same time, a new power was rising on the Greek mainland, the Mycenaeans. These warrior kings, based in fortified citadels like Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos, had long admired and interacted with the Minoans. They borrowed their writing, linear A, transformed into linear B, their art, and their symbols. But they brought with them a different culture, one of warriors, weapons, and fortifications. By the later 15th century BCE, Mycenaean influence in Crete is unmistakable. Knossos, the last great Minoan palace, came under Mycenaean control. Administrative tablets found there are written in Linear B, the script of the Mycenaeans. The peaceful, open palaces of Crete gave way to a culture more militarized, more hierarchical, less centered on joy and ritual. The shift is stark. Where the Minoans built airy courtyards, the Mycenaeans built walls. Where Minoan art celebrated dolphins, lilies, and dancing women, Mycenaean art focused on warriors, chariots, and battles. Crete, once the heart of a unique civilization, became one jewel in the Mycenaean crown. A change in spirit. This transition was more than political. It was cultural. The symbols of the Minoans, the bull, the labyrinth, the horns of consecration, did not vanish, but they lost their central place. The Mycenaeans repurposed them, folding them into their own warrior ethos. The vibrant frescoes of nature gave way to stiffer, more martial scenes. The role of women, once so prominent in Minoan ritual, diminished under Mycenaean rule. It is as though the joyous rhythm of Minoan life slowed, darkened, and hardened. A culture of openness and connection was replaced by one of power and control. The fall of Knossos. Knossos itself lingered under Mycenaean administration until around 1375 BCE. Then it, too, was destroyed, by fire, by conflict, perhaps by rebellion. When its walls fell, the last flame of Minoan power was extinguished. The island was not abandoned. Villages remained, farms continued, life went on. But the palatial system, the heart of Minoan culture, was gone. Crete became part of the wider Mycenaean world, no longer a leader but a subject. Theories of collapse. Why did the Minoans decline? Scholars still debate. Natural disaster, the eruption of Thera, earthquakes, and tsunamis may have weakened the civilization beyond recovery. Economic strain, the loss of ships and trade networks may have crippled their economy. Invasion, the Mycenaeans may have invaded directly, seizing control of a weakened island. Internal strife, civil unrest, rebellion, or social change may have undermined their system from within. The truth may lie in a combination. Natural disasters shook them, economic troubles strained them, and external rivals pressed in. Together, these forces proved too much, and a civilization that had thrived for centuries gave way. Echoes in myth. The Greeks remembered this decline not in records, but in myths. The story of Theseus slaying the Minotaur may reflect the triumph of the Mycenaeans over Crete, the replacement of one power by another. Ariadne, abandoned on Naxos, may symbolize the fading of Minoan influence, once central, now left behind. Through myth, the memory of Minoan greatness and its fall survived, transformed into story. A civilization remembered. Though the Minoans declined, they were not forgotten. Their art, their symbols, their myths echoed in Greek culture for centuries. Even in decline, they shaped the imagination of those who followed. To walk through Knossos today is to see both greatness and fragility. The frescoes still shine, but they are cracked. The throne still sits, but it is empty. The horns still rise, but the voices that once passed beneath them are gone. The beauty of twilight. There is a melancholy beauty in the decline of civilizations. To see the ruins of Knossos is to feel both awe at what was built and sadness at what was lost. Yet decline is not only an end. It is also transformation. The Minoans did not vanish into nothing, they flowed into Greek culture, into myth, into the legacy of Europe. Their twilight was long, and though their palaces fell, their influence endured. Looking ahead. Tonight, we have walked through the decline of the Minoans, the disasters, the invasions, the cultural shifts that dimmed their light. But twilight is also transition. As the Minoans faded, the Mycenaeans rose, bringing with them new symbols, new stories, and new power. In the next part of our journey, we will step into this transition, exploring how the Mycenaeans took over Crete, reshaping its culture and carrying its legacy into the age of Greek heroes. The palaces of Crete had stood for centuries, their frescoes gleaming, their courtyards alive with festivals. But by the mid-2nd millennium BCE, the Minoans' world had begun to fade. Into this space stepped a new power, the Mycenaeans. They came not from the islands, but from the rocky hills of mainland Greece. Their citadels crowned with walls of stone, their leaders armed with bronze swords, their culture steeped in warrior ethos. The Mycenaeans did not build airy palaces open to the sun and wind. They built fortresses, stone strongholds like Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos. Yet as they looked across the sea to Crete, they saw a land of wealth, artistry, and influence. And in time, they took it for their own. Tonight, we step into this turning point, the takeover of Crete by the Mycenaeans. We will see how they absorbed the Minoan world, reshaped it in their own image, and in the process carried Minoan influence forward into the age of Greek heroes. Who were the Mycenaeans? The Mycenaeans emerged around 1600 BCE on the Greek mainland, a people who admired and emulated the Minoans but lived in a very different environment. Their homeland was rocky and mountainous, less fertile than Crete, demanding resilience and toughness. Their society was organized around wanaks, or warrior kings, who commanded fortified palaces. Unlike the Minoans, whose art emphasized nature, joy, and ritual, the Mycenaeans celebrated battle, hunting, and heroic strength. Their graves, the famous shaft graves of Mycenae, contained gold masks, swords, and weapons, symbols of status built upon martial power. Yet from the beginning, they looked outward, across the Aegean, to the culture of Crete. Minoan pottery, symbols, and scripts made their way to the mainland, influencing Mycenaean life even before the takeover. The moment of transition. By around 1450 BCE, the balance tipped. Palaces at Phaistos, Malea, and Zakros were destroyed, many left in ruins. Only Knossos survived, continuing as a center of power, but now under Mycenaean control. How did this happen? Scholars debate. Some argue for invasion, with Mycenaean warriors crossing the sea, seizing Crete by force. Others see a more gradual cultural infiltration, with Mycenaeans rising to positions of influence, eventually dominating Knossos. Still others propose that Crete, weakened by disaster, invited mainland leaders for protection, only to be absorbed. Whatever the exact process, by 1400 BCE the evidence is clear: Knossos was a Mycenaean palace. Administrative records were kept in Linear B, the Mycenaean script adapted from Minoan Linear A. The officials were Greek-speaking Mycenaeans. The Minoan world had entered a new phase. Life in Mycenaean Knossos. What changed when the Mycenaeans took control? Some things continued, others shifted dramatically. Continuity: the architecture of Knossos remained, its courtyards and frescoes still in use. Trade continued, ships still sailed, rituals still honored the gods. The Mycenaeans were not destroyers of all things Minoan, they admired too much of what they found. Change: the tone of art and society shifted. Frescoes depicted warriors, chariots, and hunting scenes, not only dolphins and dancers. Women, once central, receded in prominence. The religious symbols of bulls and labrices remained, but now alongside weapons and power. Knossos under Mycenaean rule was a blend, Minoan beauty shaped by Mycenaean strength, a hybrid culture straddling two worlds. Linear B and administration. One of the clearest signs of Mycenaean control is the appearance of Linear B tablets at Knossos. These clay records, baked accidentally in palace fires, reveal a highly organized bureaucracy. They list offerings to gods, distributions of grain, inventories of oil, even allocations of armor and chariots. For the first time, we glimpse administration in detail. Unlike Minoan Linear A, still undeciphered, Linear B has been cracked, revealing that the language recorded is an early form of Greek. This means that Mycenaean officials were running the show, their words inscribed on clay in the shadow of Minoan walls. The tablets show both continuity and change, the same palatial system of storage and redistribution, but now under new masters with new priorities. The spread of Mycenaean power. From Knossos, the Mycenaeans extended their reach. Crete became a node in their expanding world, its harbors launching ships that sailed not only the Aegean but beyond, to Cyprus, Anatolia, and even the Near East. The Mycenaean world was one of warriors, but also of merchants. They built on Minoan networks, using Crete's strategic position to strengthen their thalassocracy. In this way, the Minoan spirit of trade lived on, though the cultural tone was different. A clash of spirits. The contrast between Minoan and Mycenaean culture is stark. The Minoans celebrated life in their art, dolphins leaping, lilies blooming, dancers moving in joy. The Mycenaeans celebrated death and war, warriors in chariots, duels, and hunting lions. In Crete, the two blended. The grace of Minoan frescoes softened the harshness of Mycenaean imagery. The strength of Mycenaean administration gave order to Minoan openness. But the balance had shifted. The joyous heart of the Minoan world no longer beat as it once had. The fate of the Minoans. What happened to the Minoan people themselves? They did not vanish. Farmers still worked the fields, artisans still made pottery, women still carried flowers in processions. But their leaders, their palaces, their symbols of central authority were now Mycenaean. The culture was absorbed. The Minoans became part of the Mycenaean world, their identity fading into the larger story of Greece. Yet traces of their uniqueness lingered, threads of ritual, echoes of myth, fragments of art. The heroic age begins. With the Mycenaean takeover, Crete entered the world that would one day become Homer's. The Mycenaeans were the ancestors of the heroes of the Iliad, Agamemnon, Achilles, Odysseus. They carried with them the warrior ethos that shaped Greek epic and legend. Crete, once the land of labyrinths and priestesses, was now part of this heroic age. Yet even as the Mycenaeans spread their power, the memory of Minoan Crete endured. Myths of Minos, Ariadne, and the Minotaur kept alive the distinctiveness of the island. The Greeks never forgot that Crete had once been different, a place of mystery and marvel. The fragility of power. The Mycenaeans may have taken Crete, but their own world was fragile. Within a few centuries, their palaces too would burn, their power collapse, their writing vanish. The fall of the Mycenaeans plunged Greece into the so-called Dark Age, a time when memory dimmed and only myth carried forward the past. In this way, the takeover of Crete was not only a story of dominance but of impermanence. Both Minoans and Mycenaeans would fade, leaving only ruins and legends. A blended legacy. Still, the Mycenaean takeover ensured that Minoan influence lived on. Through Linear B, the Minoan palatial system shaped Greek administration. Through art, Minoan motifs softened Mycenaean harshness. Through myth, Minoan stories became part of Greek imagination. Even in takeover, the Minoans were not erased, they were woven into the tapestry of Greek civilization, their threads visible if one looks closely. Looking ahead. Tonight, we have walked through the Mycenaean takeover of Crete. We have seen Knossos under new rulers, frescoes shift in tone, and scripts change from Linear A to Linear B. We have watched a civilization of joy become a culture of war, yet carry its legacy forward. In the next part of our journey, we will step away from history and back into myth. We will explore the echoes of the labyrinth, the way memory of Knossos and its mysteries persisted in stories long after the palaces had fallen. The stones of Knossos may be silent now, its halls long emptied, but the labyrinth lives on. Not as a ruin, not as an archaeological site, but as a story, one of the most enduring tales of the ancient world. Long after the Minoans had faded, long after the Mycenaean rulers had themselves fallen, the Greeks told and retold the story of the labyrinth, of Minos, of Ariadne, and of the Minotaur. It is a story of confinement and escape, of monsters and heroes, of wisdom and betrayal. But it is also a memory, an echo of a civilization whose complexity, mystery, and symbols left too deep an impression to vanish. Tonight, we will follow those echoes. We will wander through the corridors of myth, exploring how the labyrinth remained alive in imagination, carrying the memory of the Minoans far beyond their time. The labyrinth in Greek imagination. By the time of classical Greece, the Minoans were centuries gone. Yet Greek poets, dramatists, and storytellers spoke often of Crete. The labyrinth was the centerpiece of these tales, a structure so complex that no one who entered could find their way out, built to imprison a monster that should never have existed. To the Greeks, the labyrinth symbolized mystery. It was the place of the unknown, the realm of confusion, the test of courage. To enter it was to risk being lost forever, to emerge was to prove one's strength and wit. Knossos itself, with its endless corridors and chambers, may have inspired the image. Travelers who visited the ruins, or even those who heard descriptions, could easily imagine them as a maze. What better word for such a place than labyrinthos, the house of the double axe, the palace of mystery? Ariadne's thread. The most enduring symbol of the labyrinth is not the monster, but the thread. Ariadne, daughter of Minos, gave Theseus a ball of string so that he could find his way out after slaying the Minotaur. This simple image, the unrolling of a thread through winding corridors, has outlasted all else. It is used even today as a metaphor, the thread of logic, the thread of a story, the guide through complexity. In this way, the myth of the labyrinth gave us not only a story but a concept, a mental tool that continues to shape how we think. It is as though Ariadne's gift was not just to Theseus, but to all of us, offering a way through the puzzles of life. The Minotaur as memory. And what of the Minotaur, the half-man, half-bull who dwelt within the labyrinth? To the Greeks, he was a monster, a symbol of unnatural union, a creature to be slain. But perhaps behind the monster lies memory. The bull was sacred to the Minoans, central to their rituals of leaping and sacrifice. The image of a bull-headed figure may have been a distorted echo of priests in masks, or of rituals in which humans and bulls were symbolically joined. To later Greeks, who did not share the same worldview, such practices may have seemed monstrous, transformed in story into the Minotaur. In this way, the Minotaur may be less a creature of imagination than a reflection, distorted, but still recognizably linked to Minoan belief. The labyrinth beyond Greece. The story of the labyrinth did not end with the Greeks. The Romans told it too, weaving it into their myths and mosaics. Later, in medieval Europe, the labyrinth became a Christian symbol, carved into the floors of cathedrals as a metaphor for life's journey toward salvation. Pilgrims would walk its winding path in meditation, echoing the steps of Theseus through Knossos. In Renaissance art, the Minotaur returned, painted and sculpted as a figure of fascination. In modern times, the labyrinth has appeared in novels, films, and philosophy, its corridors now metaphors for the human mind, for complexity, for the puzzles of existence. Through all these retellings, the echo of Knossos persists. The labyrinth remains a thread connecting us to the Minoans, even when we do not realize it. The symbolism of the labyrinth. What is it about the labyrinth that endures? Perhaps it is its universal symbolism. Complexity. The labyrinth represents the confusing paths of life, where choices twist and turn, and one can lose direction. Confinement. It is the place where we face what we fear, where the monster waits in the dark. Escape. It is also the place where wisdom and courage find their reward, where the thread leads us back into the light. In all these ways, the labyrinth speaks to human experience. It is not only a myth of Crete, it is a mirror of life itself. The voice of Daedalus. We must also remember Daedalus, the craftsman who built the labyrinth. He is a figure of genius and tragedy, imprisoned by his own invention, escaping with wings only to lose his son, Icarus. His story intertwines with the labyrinth, reminding us that creation and consequence are bound together. To later generations, Daedalus symbolized the artist, the inventor, the human mind itself. His labyrinth was not only a building but a metaphor for invention, for the complexity of human thought. In his story, too, we hear the echoes of Knossos, the palace as a place of creation, ingenuity, and mystery. A visitor's perspective. Imagine yourself as a visitor to Knossos in antiquity, long after the palaces had fallen. The ruins still stand, corridors crumbling, frescoes fading, yet the scale remains impressive. You walk through hallways that twist and turn, chambers that open unexpectedly, stairways that lead into shadow. It is easy to see why people spoke of a labyrinth here. The palace itself feels like one, even in ruin. And as you walk, you hear stories, of Minos, of Pasiphae, of the Minotaur, of Ariadne's thread. You realize that you are walking not only through ruins, but through myth, the two so intertwined that they cannot be separated. Knossos as legend. For centuries, Knossos was remembered not as a historical site, but as a legendary one. It was the home of Minos, the king who judged the dead. It was the dwelling of the Minotaur. It was the house of the Labyrinth. This legendary aura meant that even when memory of the Minoans as a people was lost, the site itself remained famous. Travelers and storytellers alike spoke of it, ensuring that its echoes never fully died away. The labyrinth within us. In the end, the labyrinth is more than a ruin, more than a myth. It is a symbol that lives within us. We all know what it is to feel lost in corridors of uncertainty, to face monsters of fear and doubt, to seek the thread that will lead us out. We all carry a piece of Ariadne's gift, the hope of guidance, the possibility of escape. In this way, the labyrinth is eternal. It began at Knossos, but it lives in human imagination, in every culture, in every age. It is the Minoans' most enduring legacy, not of stone or fresco, but of story. Looking ahead. Tonight, we have walked through the echoes of the labyrinth, heard the thread unwind, and faced the Minotaur in myth. We have seen how story outlived civilization, how symbols endured even when palaces fell. In the next part of our journey, we will leave myth behind and step into history once more. We will meet Sir Arthur Evans, the archaeologist who uncovered Knossos in the modern age, and see how his discoveries, and his imagination, brought the Minoans back into the light. For centuries, Knossos lay hidden. The palace that had once echoed with music and dance, that had been the stage for ritual and myth, became a ruin buried under earth and silence. Locals told stories of the labyrinth, of King Minos, of the Minotaur, but no one knew for certain where those tales had come from. The Minoans themselves seemed lost, forgotten by time. Then, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a man named Sir Arthur Evans arrived. With curiosity, determination, and imagination, he uncovered the ruins of Knossos and, in doing so, brought the Minoans back into the world's memory. His work was controversial, praised and criticized in equal measure, but without him the Minoans might still be whispers in myth. Tonight, we will walk with Evans through the dust of excavation, seeing how he revealed, interpreted, and sometimes reimagined the world of Knossos. A world waiting to be found. Even before Evans, travelers had speculated about Knossos. Ancient writers spoke of Crete as the land of Minos and a labyrinth, but its location was unclear. In the 19th century, as archaeology blossomed in Greece and the Near East, attention turned to Crete. Local farmers sometimes unearthed strange seals and artifacts while plowing their fields. These objects bore symbols unlike Greek or Egyptian writing. They hinted at a lost civilization, one older than classical Greece. The stage was set, waiting for someone to dig. Arthur Evans arrives. Arthur Evans was an Englishman, educated at Oxford, with a passion for ancient history. He had worked as a curator at the Ashmolean Museum, where he studied strange engraved stones said to come from Crete. Convinced they represented a lost writing system, he determined to find their source. In 1900, Evans purchased land near the modern village of Heraklion, on a hill called Kefla. Locals had long believed it was the site of Knossos. With teams of workers, he began to dig. Within weeks, he struck walls, floors, and staircases. Soon, entire halls and courtyards emerged, buried for thousands of years. Evans had found the palace of Knossos. The Great Excavation. The pace of excavation was breathtaking. Over the next decades, Evans and his team uncovered vast stretches of the palace, storerooms lined with giant jars, corridors winding in complex patterns, staircases rising to upper floors, and frescoes painted with dolphins, lilies, and dancers. For the first time, the world glimpsed the Minoans. Their art was vibrant, their architecture complex, their culture sophisticated. Evans, captivated, declared that he had found Europe's first great civilization. The discovery of writing. Among the finds were hundreds of clay tablets, inscribed with unknown scripts. Evans classified them as Linear A and Linear B, recognizing that they represented two stages of writing. Though he could not decipher them, he believed they revealed a literate, bureaucratic society. It was not until the 1950s that Michael Ventris cracked Linear B, proving it was Greek. For Evans, the tablets confirmed his belief that Knossos was the center of a complex, organized civilization. Evans's vision. Evans was not content simply to uncover ruins, he wanted to bring them to life. Using concrete and plaster, he reconstructed parts of the palace, repainting frescoes, rebuilding walls, and restoring staircases. Visitors could walk through the palace not only as ruin but as imagined reality. Here, however, lies controversy. Evans's reconstructions reflected his interpretation of the Minoans, a peaceful, joyous people ruled not by warriors but by priestesses and ritual. He painted the past with broad strokes, sometimes letting imagination outrun evidence. Critics argue that his reconstructions distort the truth. Supporters counter that without them, the Minoans would not be known so vividly today. The Palace Reimagined. Walk with Evans into his restored Knossos. The walls are painted with bright colors, frescoes of dolphins swim above doorways, columns painted red rise toward the ceiling. The throne room gleams with its gypsum seat and griffin frescoes. Staircases lead upward to halls that feel alive again. Is this how the Minoans truly lived? Perhaps not exactly. But Evans gave shape to their world, turning stone foundations into a palace of imagination. Through his vision, Knossos became not only an archaeological site but a story once more, much like it had been in myth. The Minoan civilization named. It was Evans who gave the civilization its name. Minoan, after King Minos of Greek legend. By choosing this name, he tied the ruins directly to the myths of the Labyrinth and the Minotaur. Whether or not those myths were literal memories, the name stuck, and the Minoans entered history under the shadow of their legendary king. The joyous people. Evans was fascinated by the contrast between the Minoans and the Mycenaeans. Where the mainland Greeks were warriors, the Minoans, in his view, were artists and dancers, lovers of beauty and peace. He pointed to frescoes of women in flowing skirts, of dolphins leaping, of festivals and rituals, as evidence of a culture built on joy. Modern scholarship is more cautious, reminding us that the Minoans also practiced sacrifice, faced disasters, and built systems of power. Yet the image of a joyous, peaceful people remains deeply appealing, and much of it comes from Evans's interpretation. The critics and the legacy. Over time, Evans's reconstructions have drawn criticism. His use of concrete altered the ruins. His restored frescoes, based on fragments, often reflect more imagination than fact. His interpretations, such as matriarchal priestess rule, are debated, with evidence both for and against. Yet without Evans, the Minoans might still be unknown. His work brought them into the public eye, inspired generations of archaeologists, and gave us a vision of Europe's earliest high culture. He may not have told the whole truth, but he opened the door. Walking through today. To visit Knossos today is to walk both through ancient history and Evans's imagination. You see the original stones of storerooms, worn and weathered, and above them reconstructions of red columns and painted walls. You walk through the throne room, sit on the gypsum seat, and feel both the past and the vision of Evans layered together. It is a place where archaeology and storytelling meet, where ruins and imagination blend, much as myth and history once did. In this sense, Evans himself became part of the Minoan story, a modern Daedalus, reconstructing a labyrinth of his own design. The rediscovery of the Minoans. Evans's work transformed more than ruins. It changed our understanding of history. Before him, the roots of European civilization were thought to begin with classical Greece. After him, it was clear that there had been a flourishing culture centuries earlier, a culture that shaped the Aegean world and left its mark on myth. The Minoans, once forgotten, were rediscovered as pioneers of art, architecture, and seafaring. Their place in history was restored, thanks to Evans and his vision. Looking ahead. Tonight, we have walked with Sir Arthur Evans through the excavation of Knossos. We have seen him uncover storerooms, discover tablets, restore frescoes, and name a civilization. We have seen his vision, part fact, part imagination, bring the Minoans back into memory. In the next part of our journey, we will look more closely at the controversies his work sparked. What did Evans get right, and what did he get wrong? How much of the Knossos we see today is ancient, and how much is modern invention? We will explore the debates that still swirl around his legacy, and what they mean for our understanding of the Minoans. The rediscovery of Knossos at the dawn of the 20th century was a triumph, but it was also a beginning. Arthur Evans gave the world the Minoans, named them, painted them, built them anew. Yet his vision has never been beyond question. To walk through Knossos today is to walk not only among Bronze Age ruins but among Evans's ideas, his reconstructions, his imagination. Tonight, we will explore these controversies. We will ask, what did Evans see correctly, what did he invent, and how do modern archaeologists interpret the Minoans differently? This is not to diminish his work, but to understand that history is never only about discovery, it is about interpretation. And interpretation always carries debate. Evans the visionary, Evans the storyteller. Arthur Evans was more than an archaeologist. He was a storyteller. As he unearthed Knossos, he imagined the lives of its people, their rituals, their art, their rulers. He filled in gaps with color, reconstructing frescoes from fragments, rebuilding walls from foundations, and naming gods and goddesses where no text survived. In this, he was both brilliant and bold. He gave us a vision of the Minoans that still captivates today, a peaceful, artistic people ruled by priestesses, devoted to nature and joy. But how much of that vision was real, and how much was Evans's own creation? The reconstructions. Perhaps the most visible controversy is the reconstruction of Knossos itself. Evans did not leave the palace as ruins. He rebuilt it, using reinforced concrete, a modern material not found in the Bronze Age. He painted columns red and black, recreated staircases, and installed replicas of frescoes. Critics argue that this blurred the line between ancient and modern. Visitors cannot always tell where the Minoans end and Evans begins. What we see at Knossos is as much a 20th century creation as a Bronze Age one. Supporters, however, note that without reconstruction, Knossos would be little more than low walls and foundations. Evans brought it to life, giving the public a vivid sense of the past. His reconstructions, though imperfect, made the Minoans visible. The frescoes. Another point of debate lies in the frescoes. Many of the famous images, the prints of the lilies, the dolphins, the bull leapers, were pieced together from fragments. In some cases, only a small portion of the original survives, with the rest imagined by restorers. The prints of the lilies, for example, may not depict a prince at all. Some scholars suggest it is a composite figure, created by Evans's team from unrelated fragments. Similarly, the dolphin fresco above the Queen's Megaron may have been reassembled with generous interpretation. Does this mean they are false? Not entirely. The fragments are real, the style authentic, but the exact images may not reflect what the Minoans originally painted. They are part truth, part Evans's vision. The peaceful Minoans. Evans famously described the Minoans as a peaceful, matriarchal people, devoted to art and ritual rather than war. He contrasted them with the Mycenaeans, whom he saw as militaristic and harsh. But evidence complicates this picture. Minoan art, while filled with nature and dance, also depicts bull sacrifice, possible scenes of combat, and weapons in some contexts. Archaeological finds include daggers, swords, and armor, suggesting that the Minoans were not strangers to conflict. The image of a purely peaceful people may reflect Evans's own ideals more than historical reality. Living in a Europe scarred by war, Evans may have wanted to imagine a civilization untouched by violence, a utopia of art and joy. Priestesses or kings? Another debate surrounds the role of women. Evans emphasized the prominence of women in frescoes, concluding that priestesses, not kings, were the primary rulers of Knossos. He imagined a society where women held spiritual and perhaps political authority. Modern scholars are divided. Some agree, pointing to the visibility of women in art and the possibility of goddess-centered worship. Others caution that prominence in art does not always equal power in life. Kings may have ruled behind the scenes, their images less prominent but their authority real. The truth may lie in between, a society with a balance of roles, where women were highly visible in ritual but power was shared in complex ways. The Minotaur and the Labyrinth. Evans embraced the link between Knossos and the myth of the Labyrinth. He believed the palace itself, with its countless rooms and corridors, inspired the story of the Minotaur. He tied the double axe, or Labyrinth, to the word labyrinth, suggesting that Knossos was literally the house of the Labyrinth. This interpretation is elegant, but not certain. The connection between Labyrinth and Labyrinthos is debated, and the myth may be a later Greek invention, loosely based on memories of Crete. Still, Evans's theory captured the imagination, and today most visitors to Knossos cannot help but think of the labyrinth as they walk its halls. Evans's imagination. At times, Evans allowed his imagination to run freely. He named rooms the Queen's Megaron, the Hall of the Double Axes, the Theatral Area, assigning functions that may or may not reflect their original use. Archaeologists since have questioned these labels, noting that the evidence for them is often thin. Yet names are powerful. They shape how we see. By calling a room the Queen's Megaron, Evans guided generations of visitors to imagine queens and priestesses there, even if the truth is unknown. His imagination became part of the story, entwined with the ruins themselves. A double legacy. What, then, is Evans's legacy? On one hand, he distorted the past, rebuilding ruins in modern materials, reconstructing frescoes with guesswork, and shaping interpretation with his own ideals. On the other hand, he revealed a forgotten civilization, gave it a name, and brought it to life for the world. Without Evans, the Minoans might still be a whisper. With him, they became vivid, perhaps too vivid, painted with colors of his own choosing. His work is both gift and caution, a reminder that archaeology is not only about what we find, but how we tell the story. The ongoing debate. Archaeologists today continue to debate Evans's work. Some strip away his reconstructions, seeking only the raw stones. Others argue that his vision, though flawed, has value as part of the history of interpretation. The Palace of Knossos is thus both ancient site and modern creation, a dialogue between past and present. For the visitor, this can be confusing, but also enriching. To walk Knossos is to walk through layers, the Bronze Age foundations, Evans's early 20th century reconstructions, and modern debates about both. It is a labyrinth of history in its own right. A civilization beyond one man. Ultimately, the Minoans are greater than Evans. His reconstructions may be debated, his theories challenged, but the civilization he uncovered speaks for itself. The artistry of their frescoes, the elegance of their pottery, the complexity of their palaces, these remain undeniable. Evans may have colored our vision, but the Minoans still shine through. They remind us that history is not fixed but alive, interpreted anew by each generation. Looking ahead. Tonight, we have walked through the controversies of interpretation, Evans's reconstructions, his visions of peaceful matriarchs, his embrace of myth. We have seen both the brilliance and the flaws of his work. In the next part of our journey, we will turn from Evans to the wider legacy of the Minoans. We will ask, what did they leave behind, not only in ruins but in culture, in myth, in the imagination of Greece and Europe? How did their influence echo far beyond Crete, shaping the civilizations that followed? Civilizations rise, flourish, and fall, but they do not vanish completely. Even when their palaces crumble and their people fade into the currents of history, traces remain, threads woven into the cultures that follow. The Minoans, though their voices are lost, left behind echoes that resounded in Greece, in Rome, and later in the imagination of Europe. Their story became myth, their symbols transformed, their influence hidden in plain sight. Tonight, we will trace this legacy. We will follow the ways the Minoans endured, not only in the stones of Knossos but in the stories of gods and heroes, in the rituals of later Greeks, and even in the modern imagination. The Minoans may have fallen, but their presence lingered, shaping civilizations long after their own had disappeared. The threads of memory. When the Mycenaeans took over Crete, they absorbed much of Minoan culture. They adopted Minoan symbols, borrowed their administrative systems, and even repurposed their gods. From this fusion came the roots of Greek civilization. The Greeks of the classical age did not speak of Minoans, for that name was given by Evans centuries later. But they told stories of Minos, Ariadne, and the Labyrinth. They remembered Crete as a place of wonder, a land of kings, monsters, and gods. These stories, passed from generation to generation, ensured that the Minoans were never entirely forgotten. The gods of Crete. Many scholars believe that elements of Minoan religion found their way into Greek mythology. The Minoan great goddess, often associated with fertility, animals, and nature, may have influenced later figures such as Rhea, the mother of the gods, or Artemis, mistress of the wild. The image of the bull, so central in Minoan ritual, reappears in Greek myth again and again, from Zeus taking the form of a bull to carry off Europa, to the bull of Marathon, to the Minotaur itself. In each story, the bull is powerful, dangerous, divine, an echo of the animal once honored in Cretan frescoes and courtyards. Even the story of Zeus's birth is tied to Crete. The god was said to have been hidden in a cave on the island, nursed by a goat and guarded by dancers who clashed their shields to drown out his cries. This myth may preserve fragments of Minoan ritual, reimagined by Greeks centuries later. The Labyrinth as cultural memory. The Labyrinth is the most enduring legacy of all. To the Greeks, it was the prison of the Minotaur, a place of dread and cunning. But behind it may lie a memory of the palace of Knossos itself, with its countless chambers and winding passages. In this way, the myth transformed architecture into symbol. The palace, once a place of ritual and storage, became in story a maze of terror and escape. Through the labyrinth, the memory of Minoan complexity lived on, even when its meaning was obscured. The Greeks and the sea. The Minoans were great sailors, their ships crossing the Aegean to trade and connect. The Greeks inherited this maritime spirit. Homer's Odyssey, with its voyages to distant islands and encounters with strange peoples, may carry faint echoes of the Minoan thalassocracy. Though centuries apart, the Greeks looked to the sea with the same mixture of fear and opportunity as the Minoans once had. In this way, the Minoan legacy lived on not in direct continuity, but in spirit. Rome and beyond. When Rome rose, it too looked back to Greece and absorbed its myths. Thus the Minoan echoes passed further, woven into Roman art, literature, and imagination. Frescoes in Roman villas depict labyrinths, minotaurs, and Ariadne abandoned on Naxos. Even as the true history of the Minoans was forgotten, their stories were retold in new forms. Through Rome, the legacy spread across Europe. In medieval times, the labyrinth became a Christian symbol, carved into cathedral floors as a metaphor for the soul's journey. The Minotaur appeared in poetry and allegory as a figure of sin and struggle. Ariadne's thread became a symbol of divine guidance. The Minoans, though gone, continued to shape the Western imagination. The Renaissance revival. In the Renaissance, when classical learning was reborn, artists and writers returned to Greek myths. Once again, Ariadne was painted, the Minotaur sculpted, the labyrinth imagined. The ruins of Crete were still unknown, but the stories ensured that the Minoans remained alive in art and thought. To Renaissance thinkers, the labyrinth symbolized not only myth but the complexity of knowledge itself. Humanists spoke of the labyrinth of learning, the labyrinth of politics, borrowing a symbol that had its roots in Crete. Rediscovery in the modern age. By the 19th century, scholars began to suspect that behind the myths of Minos and the labyrinth lay a real civilization. Travelers in Crete spoke of ruins and strange artifacts. The ground was ready for Arthur Evans, who would dig and reveal the truth. When Evans named the civilization Minoan, he ensured that its legacy was permanently tied to the myths. Today, to speak of the Minoans is to speak of Minos, Ariadne, and the labyrinth. Their rediscovery was also a reimagining, a blending of archaeology and story. The Minoan spirit in European thought. Beyond myth, the Minoans have come to symbolize something larger in European imagination. Evans portrayed them as Europe's first civilization, the dawn of culture before Greece. They became a symbol of beginnings, of creativity, of a time when art and ritual flourished before the shadow of war. For some, the Minoans represent a lost paradise, a society of harmony with nature, of joyous dance and color. For others, they are a reminder of fragility, of how even great cultures can be undone by disaster and invasion. In both ways, they are powerful symbols, shaping how we imagine the past and ourselves. The legacy in language. Even in our language, Minoan echoes linger. To speak of a labyrinth is to invoke Knossos. To follow a thread of reasoning is to walk Ariadne's path. To call someone bull-headed recalls the Minotaur. These words and ideas, so ordinary now, trace their lineage to Crete. It is remarkable that a civilization silent for millennia still shapes how we speak, how we think, how we imagine. The Minoans are with us still, not only in ruins but in words. The beauty of echoes. The legacy of the Minoans is not straightforward. It is not a clear line of inheritance, but an echo, sometimes faint, sometimes distorted, always present. Their gods became Greek gods, their palaces became labyrinths, their rituals became myths. Their civilization ended, but their presence never truly vanished. To look at the Minoans is to see not only what they were, but what others made of them. The Greeks, the Romans, the medieval Christians, the Renaissance artists, the modern archaeologists, all found in them something of themselves. In this way, the Minoans live not as a fixed past, but as an evolving story. Looking ahead. Tonight, we have followed the Minoan legacy through myth, ritual, language, and imagination. We have seen how they shaped Greece, Rome, Europe, and even our modern thought. They are not gone. They remain, in story and symbol. In the final part of our journey, we will step back and look at the Minoans as a whole. We will ask what their story means for us today, what lessons their rise and fall, their beauty and fragility, can offer to a modern world that still seeks meaning in the ruins of the past. The story of the Minoans begins in mystery and ends in mystery. They rose on the island of Crete, building palaces filled with light and color. They danced with bulls, painted dolphins on their walls, sailed the seas with ships of cedar and oak. They lived in a world of beauty and complexity, where art and ritual were intertwined. And then, over centuries, their civilization faded, shaken by earthquakes, darkened by volcanic ash, overshadowed by Mycenaean conquerors. For millennia, they were forgotten, preserved only in myths of kings and monsters. Then, unearthed by Arthur Evans, they returned to us, not as they had been, but as fragments, ruins, echoes, and interpretations. Now, at the end of our journey, we pause to reflect. What do the Minoans mean to us today? What lessons can we draw from their rise, their glory, their fragility, and their legacy? Tonight, let us gather the threads of the labyrinth one last time, weaving them into a tapestry of reflection. The beauty of beginnings. The Minoans remind us that civilization does not begin with war, but with creativity. Their palaces were not fortresses, but open courts. Their art celebrated not battles, but dolphins, lilies, and dancers. Their architecture invited air and light, their rituals honored fertility and renewal. In them, we see the possibility of a culture built on joy. Though they were not without conflict or sacrifice, their emphasis was on life's vibrancy, not its destruction. This is a lesson still powerful today, that beauty and creativity can be foundations of society, as important as power and defense. The fragility of greatness. Yet the Minoans also remind us that no civilization is immune to fragility. Earthquakes toppled their palaces, tsunamis crashed upon their shores, volcanic ash dimmed their skies. Their wealth, so tied to ships and trade, could be undone by a single wave. Even the strongest systems can falter when nature turns, when economies shift, when rivals rise. The Minoans endured for centuries, but in the end, they too fell. For us, this is a lesson in humility. No matter our achievements, we remain tied to the forces of earth, sea, and sky. The mystery of silence. One of the most haunting aspects of the Minoans is their silence. Their script, linear A, remains undeciphered. Their voices do not reach us directly. We know them only through fragments, pottery, frescoes, ruins. This silence is both loss and gift. It is loss, because we long to hear their words, their thoughts, their stories in their own voices. But it is also gift, because their silence invites imagination. We are drawn into their world, piecing together meaning, filling in gaps with wonder. The Minoans remind us that history is not only about answers, but about questions. The power of story. From the Labyrinth to Ariadne's thread, the Minoans live on in story. Myths transformed their rituals and symbols into timeless tales. Even when history forgot them, imagination remembered. This teaches us that story can outlast stone. Civilizations may crumble, but their memory endures in the tales we tell. In this way, the Minoans are immortal, woven into the myths of Greece, Rome, Europe, and beyond. The dialogue of past and present. The rediscovery of Knossos shows us that the past is never fixed. Arthur Evans gave us one vision of the Minoans: peaceful, matriarchal, joyous. Modern archaeology questions parts of his vision, yet his influence remains. History is always dialogue, between ruins and interpreters, between evidence and imagination. The Minoans remind us that the past is not a single truth, but a conversation across time. Each generation sees them anew, shaping their story to its own questions and dreams. The threads we carry. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the Minoans is the thread they offer us, like Ariadne's gift to Theseus. It is the thread of memory, guiding us through the labyrinth of time. We carry their images: dolphins, lilies, bulls. We carry their symbols: the labyrinth, the horns of consecration. We carry their stories: Minos, Ariadne, the Minotaur. These are not just relics, they are part of our own imagination, part of how we think about beginnings, mysteries, and the nature of civilization. To reflect on the Minoans is to follow their thread, to walk through the corridors of human history and remember that even what is lost can shape what is to come. Lessons for today. What, then, can we take from the Minoans into our own time? Celebrate life. Like the Minoans, we can remember to honor beauty, art, and nature. These are not luxuries, but foundations. Respect fragility. Our world, like theirs, is tied to the forces of nature. Earthquakes, storms, and climate remind us of our limits. Embrace mystery. Not everything can be known, and that is not failure. Mystery invites curiosity, humility, imagination. Value story. The tales we tell about ourselves may endure longer than our buildings or technologies. They are what future generations will remember. The Minoans, though ancient, still speak to us. Their story is both warning and inspiration. The quiet of the ruins. Let us imagine one final scene. You stand at Knossos at dusk. The tourists have gone, the air is still. The stones are warm from the day's sun. You walk through the courtyard, past the throne, down corridors that twist into shadow. The voices are gone, but you can almost hear them: the laughter of dancers, the chants of priests, the rush of feet in festival. The dolphins still leap on the walls, the lilies still bloom in color, the bulls still lower their horns in eternal motion. The Minoans are not gone. They are here, in the silence, in the stones, in the myths, in us. A civilization remembered. The story of the Minoans is not only the story of Crete, but of humanity. It is the story of how we build, how we dream, how we endure, and how we remember. It is the story of fragility and resilience, of beauty and loss, of myth and truth intertwined. As we close this journey, we hold onto their thread. It leads us not out of the labyrinth, but deeper into it, into the endless winding paths of history, where every ruin, every myth, every echo invites us to listen, to wonder, to remember. The Minoans may be lost, but they are not forgotten. Their labyrinth still lives in us. And so, our journey through the world of the Minoans comes to a close. From the first stone laid at Knossos, to the myths of kings and monsters, to the rediscovery of their palaces in modern times, we have followed their thread through history, myth, and imagination. We have walked their courtyards, stood before their frescoes, heard the echoes of their festivals, and felt the silence of their decline. We have traced their legacy into Greece, Rome, and beyond, until it reached us, here and now, across thousands of years. The Minoans remind us of beauty, fragility, resilience, and mystery. They remind us that civilizations rise and fall, but their stories endure. And in those stories, so carefully preserved in myth and rediscovered in stone, we find not only them, but ourselves. Thank you for joining me on this journey. May the memory of the Minoans, of dolphins leaping, lilies blooming, and the labyrinth's winding halls accompany you into quiet reflection, into dreams, and into rest. Background historian out.